It's official. Good morning, everybody. We're all here today because we recognize the importance of agriculture in the region. And today's meeting is our first policy meeting for the San Diego Agricultural Planning Program. And today's focus is primarily on land access and accessibility. But before we get started, I want to briefly mention myself, who I am. My name is Adam Wilson. I previously served as land use advisor to County Supervisor Diane Jacob for the County of San Diego. And I was very instrumental in a lot of promotion programs that were a part of the county, which I'll speak to a little more later in the program. But it's a pleasure to be here in front of all of you and to help facilitate this meeting. Because as we know, this industry is important as ever, and it's one of the largest ones in San Diego County. And it's good to just be here and talk and work through these issues, work through these policies, work through these regulations to see what we can do to promote, protect agriculture in San Diego County. So real quickly, I think since it's a fairly intimate group, if we could maybe just go around the table and introduce each other really briefly, take 10, 15 seconds and say your name and title, organization, who you're from. And Joel, maybe we can start with you.
Hey everybody, my name is Joel Kramer. I'm the ag specialist at the Resource Conservation District here in San Diego County, for the one in Lakeside.
And I'm Lance Criley. I'm the range management specialist for the Cleveland National Forest here in San Diego County and Orange Riverside.
Tony Kraft, I'm the Senior Program Manager with the Community Health Improvement Partner. Our division is the Farmington Institution Center.
Jill Hanson, I own a 25-acre farm in Alpine.
Erin Grant, we farm here in Tuscany.
Nice.
Better Conklin, board president of the Resource Conservation. Shared Origins, academic coordinator with the Salt Program at the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
My name is Rourke Shanley. I supervisor Joel Anderson's district director. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the supervisor.
Thank you.
Kelly Darrell, I work with the Conservation District of San Diego, as an ag advocate. I'm Priscilla Monkpower, analyst with.
And I'm Sherry Ryan with San Diego State University. I'm a city planning faculty there and working on the research team for this project.
Katie Ostrander, and representing the San Diego County Cattle Women. And then we also have a 6th generation cattle ranch out in Warner Springs.
Grant, City of San Diego, Office of Councilmember Martin Hall Woodward's office, District 5, we're mostly border just south of Escondido, Rancho Bernardo, and San Pasqual. So happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. Sir in the hat.
John Stell with 4J Horse and Livestock, cattle rancher down in Wool, also representing the San Diego Imperial County CCA.
Pleasure. Thank you. Sir, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Susan Allen, an analyst here on behalf of the County of San Diego Department of Ag.
Go County, thanks for coming. So, yeah, real quick, the San Diego Ag Planning Program, as probably all of you know, it's really just taking a look at all the existing policies and regulations throughout these municipalities and regions and jurisdictions. And the program really focuses on trying to see how we can identify the needs in the region, identify changes in some of these policies and regulations. And as I mentioned earlier, everything in our capacity to protect and promote ag in our region. So without further ado, we'll get this meeting underway. And I wanted to introduce the primary partners part of this program. And there's a couple of them. And I wanted to start with Priscilla Monkpower with LAFCO as they are the grant manager for the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think I can protect my voice.
Yeah, I feel
Don't
the
let me
same.
know if you can't hear me. Can I just click up here?
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here, our partners, but also all of you who just made time to be here today. We've just finished up our first year out of a 2-year grant. So we're super excited to be moving forward with the policy phase. And so again, Priscilla Mumpower, analyst with San Diego County LAFCO. We're the lead applicant for the grant, but working very closely with the project managers, Joel and Cody Hill, who are with the RCD of Greater San Diego County. And so I want to just start by giving just a brief background on the grant and sort of what we've been working on and why we're all here today. And so the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Grant, also known as SALC, is a component of the California Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. It was created in 2014 and is funded by the California Climate Investments Program, which uses cap and trade auction proceeds to fund projects which are directly tied to reducing GHG emissions and also to benefit vulnerable communities within the state. Some of the principal goals of SALC are to, one, protect at-risk agricultural lands, and then to also further Assembly Bill 32, which seeks to avoid increases in GHG emissions. There's two ways that SALC is kind of divvied up. So you can either apply for an agricultural conservation acquisition grant or an agricultural conservation planning grant, which is what we're here facilitating today. So the San Diego Agricultural Planning Program, again, lead applicant San Diego County LAFCO, working very closely with RCD of Greater San Diego County. We applied in 2021 and were awarded in April of 2021, shortly after we started work in June of 2021, and that work extends through June of 2023. And then it's $250,000 to work on 5 key tasks. And so what have we done since then? We've established key partnerships, and some of you have heard from them today. So Mission Resource Conservation District, San Diego State University, Food Shed, Community Health Improvement Partners, also known as CHIP, DUDEC, most recently with Adam as well. And they're all helping to facilitate and go through each task as up on the screen. So one being grant management, also the mapping and GHG analysis task, which SDSU has really been helpful with, the leveraging of programs, projects, and policies, which is what we're here to do today, the first meeting of several to come, the community outreach phase, which we recently completed, and then all leading to a final vision or strategic vision plan, which hopefully has some really great tangibles to help support the agricultural community, which is so important here in San Diego County. Oh, all right, so now I'm just going to pass it over to, I believe, Adam.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, I'll just pass it over to Joel Kramer with Resource Conservation District of San Diego. And if you want to just say a few words and your role into the program and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Wonderful to see everybody today. Today, we're going to be just orienting you a little bit to some of the programs that we're familiar with that some people here can present about to kind of facilitate a discussion about where there's gaps and improvements to be made. But I wanted to first start out by giving you a little bit of a sense of what the overarching goals for this policy phase of the grant are. So as Priscilla mentioned, we've already completed the outreach phase of the grant, which involved doing public listening sessions and needs assessments with producers throughout the county with our partners. And from that, we got a long list of major priorities that could be addressed. But we asked ourselves two guiding questions to think about in the policy phase, which of those could we feasibly address? And firstly was, is there already an existing program that's addressing that need? So an example of that would be the extreme weather conditions, which came up as very high ranking for most producers in the county as a major issue. But we identified that there's already partners, especially Cooperative Extension and CDFA, who are supporting programs like that, and it didn't require our full attention. And then secondly, can our core partners, so that would be groups like Mission RCD and the county and ourselves and the Farm Bureau, can we address this need in the next year? Because as Priscilla mentioned, the grant is going to end in June 2023, and we want to have something to show for it. And with those things in mind, the needs of water availability, labor availability, and land costs and access really came off as those major topics that we felt we could address. And that's what these next 3 meetings will be focusing on. And so you'll see on your tables, there's a schedule like this. Right now, we're in this orange July section. So over the last month, Sherry Ryan and her team at San Diego State have been doing an inventory of policies in different municipalities and jurisdictions in the county that affect agriculture. And you'll see the product of that, the draft inventory on your table as well. And that's all in preparation for these 3 policy meetings we're having this month. So today we're here to talk about land access, particularly for beginning farmers and ranchers. And next week we'll be focusing the conversation on water availability as well as efficiency. And on July 26th, also Tuesday at 9 o'clock here, we'll be focusing the conversation on workforce development, both how do producers get access to more workers on their lands, and also how do beginning farmers get the support they need to succeed and scale up. And this is all building towards the formation of working groups in September. So we're going to take all of the ideas from these next few meetings back to the drawing board. And Sherry and her team will conduct some analysis of which of these are feasible proposals that we can actually work on in the next few months. And then in September, we're going to propose which of these initiatives with your input we should be pursuing. And to make that work, we're going to be depending on working groups. So we're going to be inviting all of you and others who couldn't make it here today with each of those working groups on each of these policy topics represented by a decision maker from an agency, an agricultural stakeholder, as well as some kind of supporting organization. And we feel that with these 3 components, we can put together the decision making and the input as well as the resources to actually make some progress. And I'm sure Adam will be able to elaborate on what some of those will look like. But I'll pass the mic over to Sherry to give some insight about the mapping and policy
Do
phases.
you want to click through and I can stay here? Or you want me to go?
That works fine. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Great. So we're just going to do a brief overview of the work that SDSU's been doing to date. Next slide. Oh. So we've been very focused on what we're calling task 3. And that essentially is the inventory task. So myself and another faculty have been working with students to figure out where agriculture is. So we did a pretty extensive mapping exercise, and come to find out it's very difficult data to pin down. But we identified a set of jurisdictions where we think agriculture is happening, where we think production is happening. And then we went to those cities and have begun to inventory their plans, programs, and policies to figure out how they're dealing with agriculture. And the point here really is to identify this kind of baseline condition for policies, programs at the local government level, so that we can then propose some strategies that will be part of the vision that this project is focused on. So we need to understand what the cities and the local jurisdictions are currently doing in order to kind of springboard from that, identify gaps in policies and make recommendations for some kind of productive action that can take place as part of this plan framework. So I pretty much just said what's in the following slides. I mean, so Joel mentioned how as part of task 3, a technical panel was convened. They identified these 3 topic areas that are high priority: water, land, and workforce development. We're heavily working on task 3E, which is to actually go to the local governments and figure out what the current status of agricultural policies is. So that's part of 3B. And then the next piece of work will be to synthesize that information and make these recommendations about where we should focus. So we can click through that. Oh, wrong way. Good. So just a quick overview of what we've been doing as part of the inventory process. We have taken a look at previous SALT plans. You know, this isn't the first round of SALT plans to be produced. So let's look at what other counties have done. That was kind of important. And then, as I said, we engaged in a mapping analysis to figure out where agriculture is occurring. And we found, I think 12 or 13 of the local governments in the county have current agriculture. So then we went to those local governments, their general plans, their websites, looking at the policies they have in place to support agriculture, basically. And then, so that's in progress, and next we will synthesize that. This table summarizes what we found in terms of which cities have agriculture, and we presented this at a previous meeting, and we were told that this is all wrong. So it's an interesting problem that some of the publicly available data apparently is up for discussion in terms of the amount of land that's being that's in service as agriculture. So anyways, these in terms of our inventory, when we did this mapping analysis, then we went to these cities and are engaging in trying to figure out what their policies are so that we can then make recommendations. Yeah.
Is that, is there conflict dealing with where there were previous ranches that are now declared as open space instead of ag use?
It could be kind of the nomenclature and the timing of the data that we have, but that very well could be so the name of the land has gone from some kind of agriculture grazing, now it's called open space.
Right.
So maybe we're missing.
They have a history of ag use.
Right. We did do a historic agriculture map, and that's in process also. And that, I think that was back to 1980. Is that what we went back to?
Yeah, the publicly available data called Greenland goes back to 1986, and then we factored in BLM and historic ranches as best we could that went back earlier. But you're right, it's patchy.
That's a good point, though. Thanks. Yeah, so this is some of the data we've been working with that shows currently cultivated lands in the green, grazing lands in the brown. And so this is online, and we've been doing this mapping work, and then we're trying to get this online so that Joel and his team can use this in public engagement. This is kind of an example. You can't see the scale, but this online version will be available for people to actually zoom into places and figure out, are boundaries correct? Do we need to correct something? It's missing a lot.
It's missing a lot.
And the woman from the Farm Bureau, was she thinking that this was underestimated?
Based on the county crop reports.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, you were at the meeting, right? Okay. That's right. So yeah, we think that this table is underestimating the amount of agriculture. Okay. Good. So then the inventory, we're basically going to the internet and looking at public documents, plans, programs online, and you see kind of a summary. This table, long table attached to the agenda, shows some of the policy documents at the local government level that we've been scanning. And the idea here is to scan these documents, pull out how they're dealing, incorporating, thinking about agriculture, especially preservation of agriculture or expansion of agriculture. And then ultimately we would synthesize this and use forums like this to come up with creative suggestions for how to improve or support through policy programs conservation of agriculture. Yeah.
Are you also looking at state and federal lands that you graze on? What the policies are?
We haven't so far, but we should. We could. Yeah.
Yeah, we graze on a lot of state and federal properties.
Okay. So include a scan of policies at the state and federal level that control control in one way or another agriculture grazing. Yeah, that's a good point, because we were thinking of land use control as mainly a local issue, but you're right, for state, federal level.
Could I ask for some clarification here? For example, under the county of San Diego, all the land access is meant, it lists things like the plan, the general plan.
Right.
But the 95,000 acres, that came from a different source, right?
The 95,000 acres
So of farmland.
in the county
Yeah.
came from a different source in
For
terms,
for the mapping state.
it came from a different source than the county?
It didn't come from the county general plan.
No, not necessarily.
So I don't see where the source would be for that material out here.
So the mapping effort was pulling together, especially with grazing, there's so many different agencies that manage grazing lands, so we pieced those together one by one. It wasn't from one specific group.
But some of it would have come from Sandeg's land use layer.
Yeah.
And they get their information from the county, but not necessarily, it's not necessarily the general plan per se, but they do get information from the county about the current uses of land in the county.
My confusion stems strictly from it. Is it actual data or is it zoning data?
The mapped data should be existing, not the code that's assigned to that land,
Okay.
not zoning.
Thank you.
You're right. That's a great distinction. Zoning is different than existing uses. Yes. But I think, what we're finding is that zoning could be an excellent tool for agricultural conservation. It could try to use that tool to conserve agriculture. Which would be contentious and we need a facilitator.
On the state and federal level, what's gonna happen is you're gonna find land is wildlife area. It's actually like 3 different branches with a history of branching. And then
Okay.
the state or the federal is the wildlife area, so it's not gonna be designated as ag.
Right.
And that's what you're gonna run across, including ecological reserves.
So
Same with BLM.
So that's where you get it. So that in the local plan, we probably see a designated open space.
Well, it's designated as wildlife. They have to designate an area, and the state does, as if they pick up a prior ranch, they have to designate it as either wildlife area or an ecological reserve.
Okay.
The two.
Okay.
there's a resource for that. There's printed out maps, a few packets going around. The top page includes historic ranches and historic BLM grazing lands, as well as mapped farmland from each six. And then if you turn to the next page, you'll see the current map that was released.
Yeah, I
So
don't have
we
that.
got to add to
I
that.
don't have the map, but I'm just making sure you're aware of the terminology.
Yeah.
It's gonna be,
No, that's
so
interesting.
that's gonna go further past the non-ag property, it's a wildlife area reserve. There's a history of ag on the property.
Look at Tri-Valley on all sides. Water creeks map.
So when that state or federal wildlife ecological preserve is assigned to the property, does agriculture continue? Is the,
Not always, that's my point, is that
Yeah.
you have to, there has to be a reason for either wildfire mitigation, wildlife habitat management, range improvement, those are all things that are happening with managed livestock raising right now that are where capacity is not allowed on these properties, even though they have a history, like a steep history of grazing. We're having like 200 years of ag use. It all of a sudden just stops. It's a 20-year block, there's nothing on it. It's actually part of our issue with wildfire. Among other things. That is now changing into a different direction where the managed grazing is actually helping fight the wildlife and wildfire.
with wildfire
Yeah.
management?
Carbon, storing carbon,
Okay.
yeah, everything. This is the whole other game. It's changed over the last 10 years.
diversity starts something, you know, sometimes like that middle of the agricultural. Among other kinds of things. So
Right.
there's like a, I don't remember, if it's like how that's actually parsing that out in terms of like, you know, traditional kind of agricultural
Yeah.
production versus sort of this other, you know.
This urban occurring agriculture, yeah, I think that's a whole different realm, right?
And then within that, there's different kinds of like agriculture. Gardens and those kinds of
Yep.
things.
Yep.
How about private ownership?
That would. I think that was it for my slides. Oh, it was good.
Yeah, I just
Good.
was encouraging the dialogue, so I
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate that, all the good
No, this
comments and questions.
This
And
is interesting.
I'm really looking at the tribal piece, so, you know, the East Grande Reservation is fine, but private ranches, all from the level of this Grande. But they're keeping those ranches as agriculture. But it becomes, you know, tribal.
So moving on real quick, we glossed over a slide that has the agenda, but I think everybody has an agenda in front of them. And as you can see, it's pretty detailed and outlined of today's efforts and discussion. We're going to have a few presenters that highlight a few existing programs related to ag. We're going to have a Q&A after each one of those sessions. We're going to try to limit it. But before we get into those, that's kind of what I wanted to lay the groundwork. You guys have already participated very well through the Q&A discussion and comments with Sherry. So I would just encourage you, everybody be succinct, respect everybody's time, and let's try to stay on schedule so that we can get completed in time and respect everybody's calendar today. So I think our next thing is Cody, and she's going to come up and speak to the outreach phase results that have been already completed through the process of this program.
Hello. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the outreach phase, which essentially got us to the policy phase. So in, I believe it was, winter 2021, we started creating, working with UCANR as well to build off a past producer needs assessment that they had done to use that to gather data for our needs. And we put that together and we distributed that online as well as through partners like with help from Mission and with help from Tony at Craft, Tony at Chip, not your last name is Craft, yeah. And then we also had Food Shed, they helped us out as well. I didn't know if you two ladies wanted to give any insight about how you worked with farmers to do those assessments.
We followed up those emails and calls. Johnson was my staff person was typically. So tend to be a little bit of this. I also followed up myself. I do know. And then also with some calls. So that was the initial outreach there. We also we left light, and my staff did go out. Usually we mention the program, but I don't think. So I would say outreach was something really problematic. We had our first listening session, both listening sessions, and they were provided an incentive. That it was really sort of genius. And we gave $100 to kind of say, okay, is that those, again, producers are all across the board, right? There's no single type, but providing an incentive in a new way, to make it with the line really helpful. I was pretty pleased with the variety of producers that not in a small group to actually facilitate. I don't think we have a sample by week, but we did get a pretty broad.
I'm gonna stand because I have a poll So Tony Kraft again from the Farm to Institution Center, and we had just come off of working with a program, a 20-month program. So we already followed what Darcy had said was sort of the non-problematic situation of getting that in front of the farmers. So we went to where they worked. So we'd show up, I'd have my survey, I'd call in advance. A lot of times I was there to buy stuff at their farm stands or connect with them on different things. And then I would ask permission to basically get their information. I would then do the data. And in a conversation with them, they became the storytellers and I became their stenographer. And I found that after the first 4 or 5 farmers, they would say, hey, call Jim, you know, or call Eddie Grangetto, he wants to talk. And so I found that through that, I have to say though, the guidance that we got from Joel and Cody was, we're looking for a cluster of farmers here. So make sure that you don't leave them out. We want to be able to have women farmers, you know, kind of the Rosie the Riveters, we're working close hand. So we really had in the beginning, it was successful. It was like fireworks, you know, it was like, oh, well, this is great. And then it just dissipated. So I was getting a little concerned. So with the general planning, you know, with Priscilla and everybody behind us, I think we got a really good cross section. And there were some urban farmers in there that would say, hey, listen, count us in. Had some small to medium sized farmers and say, listen, we're hydroponics, we have the same issues. But I think it validated to us at CHIP what we were really working on. And so I was really thrilled and really pleased to be part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, they were great instruments in getting that data. And overall, we were able to collect 99 of the producer needs assessments. And 15 of those were from one-on-one interactions with folks. So I really think that was really helpful. We also had a Spanish language version online. And Joel is fluent as well as members of the food shed team. So we were able to work with folks who English was not their first language. As Darcy mentioned, after we did our producer needs assessment, we held 2 individual listening sessions. So I would say a month after collecting the surveys, we held the first and then after that. And we selected folks who, first of all, said they wanted to talk more in-depth in-person conversations. And we also selected folks from demographics that we were interested in hearing about, especially demographics we felt were underrepresented in previous surveys. And so in February, we had a session at Lindo Lake Park. Shout out to all the producers who came to that. That was like the torrential rainstorm that we had in February. So very hardy folks attended that meeting. And then we had a lot of smaller farmers and newer farmers at that session. So to essentially equal the balance of hearing who we wanted to hear from, we invited a little more veteran farmers who farm or ranch on larger properties to the second one. So we kind of balanced out who we heard from. And we got a predominant of our results from the North and some parts of the East County. We were really targeting South Bay and border communities because we found in past surveys, those were kind of underrepresented. So we didn't get a large volume of folks, but we did get a couple interviews and surveys from folks within communities we hadn't heard from yet. So room for improvement there, but we definitely tried. And we were able to get a little younger audience than past surveys. So that was nice to hear from folks who are either entering farming or have been in it less than the super veterans who've been in it 30, 40 years. We got kind of a nice balance of really seasoned wisdom and people who are entering at this time. And predominantly male farmers and ranchers. And we were able to capture responses from 25% of farmers of color, which we really thought was important because, again, largely underrepresented in past surveys. The predominant amount of folks were growing perennial crops. We heard from a lot of subtropical growers, especially in that Mission region. And we also heard from predominantly 10 acres, and within that 10 acres, largely between 1 and 5 acres. So there were smaller groups. Yeah.
Hi, I don't know if it's just the font is really small.
Yeah.
Or if you can provide, and what were the ends for each one of those? You have percentages, but we don't know how many people that is.
Yeah, so those were the 99 out of all of the,
But broken out by.
yeah.
Okay, but out of 99, like what part of the file, like what is it?
Oh, yes, sorry, my notes aren't up here, so I'd be able to tell you that. I can get from my computer over here. Yeah. Yeah, close to that. So I don't have the exact numbers here, but I can get, that'd be great. Yeah, definitely. And that's a really good point. This data is highly private and protected, as that was one of the pieces that producers were very concerned about, is not necessarily wanting all of this information freely shared. So when we do share this information, it will be completely de-identified, but as well as the maps, you know, like it's very special information and we don't want it to be totally widely available. So when we do share this, it will be de-identified, but happy to give you that information. Okay, and then these were some of the primary production and profitability concerns that we asked folks about. So Joel's already mentioned the top 3 that we're here to discuss over the next few weeks, but I wanted to show what was on the table. As he mentioned as well, extreme weather was something that was the top of everybody's list. And that was something that we felt is being worked on pretty well by the following partners here. The City of San Diego's Climate Action Plan. They're working on the Regional Decarbonization Framework. And then Food Systems Alliance is working on it, as well as several programs through UC A&R. Another really important one was streamlining regulations and programs. And so instead of specifically creating a topic for that, we're using that as a lens to identify each one of these. So what kinds of programs and what kinds of regulations affect land access, water, and workforce development. So we're sort of squeezing in a 4th there as the frame for it. And also wanted to note that we're largely taking qualitative data into consideration as well. And it's part of the reason why we had the listening sessions. We got a lot of really great information from these conversations. And wanted to note that farm size, years in ag, and demographics were some of the things we took into consideration when listening to this qualitative data. So for example, while land access may not have been the top of the total pie here of things that are causing stress in agriculture, we heard it so much from new and beginning farmers. And so we felt that that was something that needed to be looked into. Water affects everyone. So that one was kind of a no-brainer on that. And then for the workforce development, farmers who are more established have different issues with workforce. Maybe that's finding workforce, maintaining workforce, whereas folks who are entering farming might feel that they don't have the skills for this, or they're needing to train. So it's workforce from different lenses, and I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, so now we'll hear from a couple folks who are working on programs in the land access sphere, and I see lots of hands. Okay.
So the 99 respondents, that way you said producers, that means farmers and ranchers.
Farmers and ranchers.
So there's over 5,700 farms in San Diego County. You guys
Yeah.
feel that you have an actual enough of a base to build on?
It was definitely under what we were looking for. And that's another piece why we have really leaned into some of the qualitative data and the conversations, because we're aware that the quantity of the responses wasn't maybe the biggest survey, but we definitely considered that.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
We did outreach to hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah.
This 99 were the ones that gave us permission to be able to put their data on paper. A lot of them, as you had alluded to, information was size, economy, how are you growing, what are your financials? A lot of farmers decided that that was just not what they wanted they wanted to voice their concerns, but we wanted to capture the data. So we cast the net out really wide, pulled that in, and that's what we got. There's a lot of farmers that were, contacted.
Yeah.
By all of us.
And also in that process, as you mentioned, you said 5,700. We saw that number too, and we were aiming for it. And part of a side project that this project has birthed is, who are those people? Because we have not been able to find one comprehensive list that's everyone. So this is helping us work towards like some form of a database that we can find all of that information. So that was like an outcome we weren't quite expecting. Yeah.
Well, I just had a thought actually, because the non-response that came up, but I was thinking the same thing is, who are these people? If you were able to, like, and I know you can't identify who these people are, but when you can do an analysis, people are, it's probably very specific, segment of population, so that might be really interesting. The other piece that comes with that might be informative though, from a research and from a data collection end, because that's something that I know is sort of a challenge in this space. More broadly, is the reasons why people did not respond. That actually would be something that would be a really big add to this particular report, or like an offshoot of what you are, if you are trying to collect good data on producers. What are some of the challenges around getting folks to respond, and then how do you actually amend some of the more traditional methods that you like for surveys with other kinds of populations in order to get to the people that you really need to reach, so you don't have a small sample size.
Yeah. I love that idea.
And so that would be something, and I would say, probably speaking, with folks here that actually have research and particular around surveys, but also, the hands-on direct working experience with farmers, to sit down as a working group and cut that piece together. Because you really need both the research side and the people that work for those producers, and synthesize that.
Yeah, thank you. That's all. That would be a great part of the outreach report. Yeah. Hi. Hey, John.
Yeah, some of the questions you just need to be, and they already are aware of it. Like when somebody asks me how many cows I'm running, you're asking me how much I have in my anything. And that's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
And so that's, you have to be real careful with that. That's probably a lot of the reason you're not getting any response.
Yeah.
And that's not, that's private information.
Absolutely.
So, you have to be careful with what you're asking. Don't take offense if you're not getting a response.
Yeah. And some of those questions, and I'm sure you two can speak to this as well. Some of those questions on our end, when we were surveying people, they were 100% optional. And if you are getting the feeling that that is like a no, some people offered that, but in the in-person, I definitely could tell like, yeah, we're going to skip that one because that might be a range this person's not comfortable with. So thank you. Yeah.
Make sure you're not taking offense to.
No, definitely not. It's not personal.
Thank you so much, Cody. I
Yeah.
had a question about extreme weather as a top issue for the respondents. And I guess my question is kind of two parts. Is how did you ask that? Or how was that worded on the survey? Because I was kind of surprised to see that as a top issue.
Yeah, so I can go back to, so we had kind of sections where people would rank their primary production concerns, their primary profitability concerns. And we would have them rank 1, 2, and 3. And we provided a list, but we didn't quite explain extreme weather. We didn't, say specific, but we heard a lot of drought and wildfire. And so leaving it a bit ambiguous, I think allowed people to maybe choose that. But yeah, we did have them say 1, 2, and 3, and that was the number one that most people put. And Joel might speak to that.
Two other hazards that came up were flooding and extreme winds. Yeah, really, just if they come at the wrong time of the season, there goes your profit for the year.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Do you have a second question?
I think that answered both my questions.
Okay.
I appreciate that. I assumed it was mostly about wildfires. And I would guess that's probably a big part of that extreme weather.
Yes.
Wildfires.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also, they address climate change, from one, area. Alpine had some degree of heat, then you would go to Ramona and it had wing heat, and then you go to Escondido and it had, water issues, climate, it kind of dropped it into a bucket where people can kind of elaborate on their concerns based on their demographics.
Just to clarify, the two top ones were.
Yeah. I saw more. Yeah.
So the Farm Bureau in this county is one of the biggest ones in the entire state.
Mhm.
And so they already have the database. There's over 1,600 members.
Mhm.
And the Farm Bureau demographics don't match your demographics.
Mhm.
But I did take the survey.
Yeah.
It was super easy. It was painless. You guys didn't ask invasive questions or anything like
Great.
that. But I think that there's a big perception as a producer because we're under so much attack and scrutiny from property taxes to insurance that I think it's kind of farmers just want to go underground and no one knows we're here. And so I talked to Joel, I talked to you, you came to our cattle women's meeting. And so my very first phone call after that was I called a trusted organization. I called the Farm Bureau. Hannah, the government wants to know what I'm doing. And she's like, take the survey, you're fine.
Yeah.
And so I think that was maybe part of what you guys needed to do more is find those membership organizations that we as producers trust
Mm.
and then get their buy-in to go to their members.
Yeah.
Because I don't think a single cattle woman except for myself took the survey.
Yeah.
And so, but that was my phone call was to Hannah saying, can I take this?
Yeah.
Are they gonna come after me? Are they gonna tax me?
Yeah.
And she's like, you're totally fine. Just
Yeah.
take the survey. So I did, and it was fine.
Yeah,
But I think it was scary.
definitely. Well,
You want to know what we're up to. I
yeah.
don't want to tell you.
Yeah, and that response, we're
Yeah.
trying to balance that out while learning how to support, and it's a fine line, but I appreciate that you shared that story because now that might help us in the future, like partner with folks who are like, they're not scary, we promise. So thank you. Any more questions on that? Cool.
Cool. Thanks, Cody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I appreciate that because we'll definitely have to re-strategize how we outreach and educate, make sure everybody knows the importance of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance of working together. So duly noted. Moving on, so we're going to move on to the existing programs, and we've got a few presenters today that are going to, like I said earlier, going to highlight some existing programs that are related to ag. I'm going to start with Chandra because I think you're pressed for time, and so if you want to come up and give us your presentation and.
I can give a very brief overview of the SALT program, although I could obviously talk about it for many, many days. Thanks again for inviting me today. So I'm going to be focusing mostly on exploring the SALT acquisition grant project type. And Priscilla had given an overview of SALT, which is that it is funded by the California Strategic Growth Council and administered by the California Department of Conservation. So it's a statewide program that uses cap and trade funds to protect agricultural lands at risk of conversion to development, or at least non-agricultural types. It's been actually pretty successful over the first 7 rounds. So as Priscilla mentioned, it started in 2014. And since then, there have been 27 planning grants awarded $5.2 million. However, there have been only 4 planning grants in Southern California. And as I mentioned, I'm an academic coordinator working across Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties. Of those 4 planning grants in SoCal, there have been 2 in San Bernardino, one that was led by the San Bernardino LAFCO with Inland Empire RCD, and the other one at the city of Yucaipa. There's been 1 in Ventura County, and then lastly, the one here in San Diego. On the acquisition side, there have been 142, totaling over $291 million. However, only 6 in Southern California. That's 3 in Imperial County, 2 in Santa Barbara, and 1 in Ventura. So not as popular here, unfortunately, and hopefully that's something that I can work with all of you to change. It has conserved about 156,000 acres and led to about 59 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions avoided, which is the equivalent of having forests established over the whole country of Italy for 1 year. So there are 3 project types for SALT, and I'm obviously focusing on the acquisition grants, which aim to permanently protect important agricultural lands under threat of conversion. But there's also planning grants to develop and implement those plans for that long-term protection. And then also capacity grants, which are aimed and are new this year to really expand in the organizational capacity to support acquisitions. So that's through staff time and outreach and anything else related to support any of the private landowners interested in developing acquisitions and conservation easements on their lands. So this is an overview of where there have been acquisition projects throughout the state. So the majority have typically been in the Bay Area or Sacramento Valley, and then also a handful in the San Joaquin Valley. And you can also see on the left side just where a lot of the important farmland is. So it tends to be more in the valley and then also towards Sacramento. But obviously Southern California has quite a lot of important farmland and important soils, as well as many small farms. So they're not going to be showing up on this map as visibly. So here's one example of an easement project. This one is out of Imperial County in Calexico. And so this one was awarded to the Trust for Public Land in collaboration with Rivers and Lands Conservancy. Rivers and Lands Conservancy is based out of San Bernardino, and the Trust for Public Land is a nationwide organization. Although they have a Southern California director whose name is Alex Size, and he has been based out of that organization and works in San Francisco, but is incredibly active in the region. And so this one is located right along the US-Mexico border, along the Greenbelt, especially on the eastern edge. It has about 100 acres of prime farmland, as well as organic mixed greens sold at various markets. And so the goal was to prevent the ranch from being urbanized and also protect it along Calexico as well too. And so there are many more examples of these, but this is just one. This is an overview of the acquisition grants in terms of eligible applicants, a timeline, and then also the grant award itself. And so the applicants themselves are the conservation buyers. And so that would include city and county local governments, nonprofit organizations, especially with agriculture and the stated purpose, resource conservation districts, California Native American tribes. The tribes, just to note, are eligible for all 3 project types for planning, acquisition, and capacity grants. So that's something that has been shifted in recent years and in recent rounds to become more inclusive of the different types of agriculture of tribes too. Also included is regional park and open space districts and authorities, and this will be in collaboration with a private landowner. The timeline, we're kind of in the middle of the SALT application phase. The pre-proposals were due in June, and those are mandatory. And then the full proposals are due in September. And we anticipate that while we're in round 8 right now, there will be around 9 next year with roughly the same application period. And then typically project awards are released at the Strategic Growth Council annual meeting in December. In terms of grant award, the landowner receives 75% of the appraisal value or 100% of funding if the project can demonstrate a meaningful benefit to a priority population. In addition to that, the conservation buyer can receive up to $60,000 for any associated real estate costs, and then up to $10,000 for a carbon farm plan or a management plan as well. And this is just a brief overview of what the grant looks like once you've received the award, which is an appraisal process for up to 6 months, followed by a review of the title report, and then just identifying any impediments, water mineral rights affected the property, then easement negotiations. And Department of Conservation has a real estate team that also works directly with the grantees towards the easement itself too. And so in total, it takes about a year at minimum to up to 16 16 months. It's a 2-year grant. So just another overview of the timeline. For what I guess next up is capacity proposals are due in August, and then both planning and acquisition proposals are due in September, and then awards announced in December. So if you're interested in applying to SALC, or if you know someone who might be interested in it, feel free to connect with me directly, or I can connect you with the Department of Conservation team. I also mentioned I have a colleague who works in the San Joaquin Valley, so if you have contacts there, please let me know and I can support. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Is there any questions or comments for her?
Yes.
Sure.
Have you done any follow-up work to interact with the producers who stay on the land? So they've been given money to stay there, right? I mean, they've essentially sold their land. They're going to stay there, continue farming. I mean, has that worked for them from their perspective?
So I am more focused on the planning grant side of SALC.
Okay.
But I'm hoping, and this is something that Department of Conservation is hoping to boost, is technical assistance for acquisitions, like specifically for those who want to support acquisitions as a conservation buyer, and then also for the private landowners. I mean, those are both critical pieces of this puzzle. I've been working with a handful of producers who are certainly interested in applying, but more of my work is focused on the latter. But that's something that needs to be done. And I'm hoping cooperative extension can develop my position into an advisor position, so I'd be able to work more directly with landowners. Yes.
I think I might be misunderstanding a little bit here, but when it comes to acquisitions, you mentioned that they are typically non-governmental entities as well as city entities that work with the private owner to purchase the land. Is the land therefore is that necessarily city owned at that point in that situation? Or is it kind of a mixed situation where it could just be still privately owned, but with assistance from?
Great question. Yeah, so it's still privately owned by the landowner. It's just that an easement or agreement was placed on the land restricting any use solely to agriculture.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Which perhaps your question is probably a good segue to what I wanted to highlight on your agenda. We were supposed to have Stephanie Neal with the County of San Diego. Unfortunately, she wasn't here to present with the county. Perhaps maybe I could take some personal liberty here, though, to maybe speak to it a little, because in my previous experience, this program was spearheaded from my former boss, Diane Jacob. And if many of you, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the program, but it's actually, it stands for Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement, or better known as PACE, and certainly not to be confused with the PACE program with energy. But I was able to pull up the board letter that went to the Board of Supervisors last year, and you might find some statistics quite alarming or quite interesting, or however we want to look at it. But I was reading here while everybody was discussing, since 2009, which isn't too far or long ago, since 2009, over 60,000 acres of agricultural land within this region has been converted to another use, representing a loss of about 20% of all agriculturally productive lands within the county. That sounds staggering to me in such a short amount of time.
When was that number? That number was from when?
From March of last year.
Okay.
So,
I think there's
and it's probably more. Yeah. Regardless, that's alarming. And the purpose of the program, and like I said, this program came out of the county's general plan in 2011. So when we updated that general plan, my boss felt it was necessary to protect as much ag land as possible in that program, since it was one of the goals and policies in the general plan. And we created a pilot program. I think the first year that we created it was about $2 million that went into the program. And it was such a wild success that in 2013, it became a permanent program and has existed ever since. So it's Chandra, it's just along the lines of what you just described, where it's providing compensation to property owners to put their property in conservation agricultural easements in perpetuity. And then real quick, I pulled up another stat. Since the PACE program's inception in 2011, the county's preserved over 2,400 acres of ag land. So 2,400. So in comparison to that 60,000 we lost, obviously not great, but obviously it's been a success for 10 years, and hopefully, maybe through the representative Joel Anderson to, keep this program alive and keep the word out there to get these property owners interested in doing so. And so also real quick, as a part of the county's 2018 climate action plan, the PACE program increased its annual easement acquisition goal from 230 acres to 443. So yeah, I feel like this is one of my little babies out of Diane Jacobs' office, because I probably wrote the original board letter. So I thought it was important to maybe not gloss over it, even though Stephanie's not here, because similar to what Chandra presented, I mean, I think it's one of those vital programs in our region to do whatever we can to keep and protect ag. So
it is a very valuable program. Some way it has commonality with the South.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit some of those differences, just to clarify how, in other words, if I was a producer and I wanted to look at one of these programs, what would be the differences between them?
Chandra, maybe you're
Sorry.
yeah, maybe you're best to answer this. I'm not quite sure the answer to that, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what some of the more specific differences are, but obviously the PACE program has been around longer. It is a local program. It's incredibly popular. SALT has not, unfortunately. I think there's certainly some distrust of a lot of the statewide organizations, whereas the County of San Diego's program is incredibly popular. There's a wait list right now, and many don't rank as high on the program are simply not funded. So that's certainly a setback there. There are opportunities for the county to support those who don't rank as high to be part of the SALT program and use funds directly from the state.
I was going to say, is there any opportunity where we could thread these programs together and, maybe working through Joel Anderson's office, since the supervisor represents those areas, to kind of put these lists together and see how we can maybe thread the people that are eligible or not, the ones that don't make the cut, things of that nature to, strengthen numbers here.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best intersectionality that works to fund those who rank highest on the PACE program to fund it, and those who rank a little bit lower to support. This program has been closest, let's say, around February or March, and then the SALT program is summer. So
That seems like a good timeline to transition to everybody. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we can move on to the next program. Priscilla, I think you're up again and speaking to our existing sphere of influences.
Yes, exactly. So I just want to talk a little bit about LAFCO and sort of the role that we play with the county, and then two of the tasks that we are tasked with within the state legislature. So to start, I just want to kind of give you a brief overview of who LAFCO is and kind of what we do here at the county. So we were established back in 1963. We stand for Local Agency Formation Commission, and we're engendered through the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Local Reorganization Act of 2000. And we were established to serve as a regional planning agency within all 58 counties within the state of California. So there's a LAFCO in each county, and we serve to regulate city and special district boundaries for the benefit of curbing urban sprawl, preserving open space lands, and preserving and protecting agricultural lands. And so we serve, some of the duties that we have through the legislature are to produce these independent studies. And these help inform our decisions when we're making changes to jurisdictional boundary or a sphere of influence, which is what I'll kind of cover and tell you about just on the next slide. And so municipal service reviews, or MSRs, are independent studies where we evaluate the level, range, and adequacy of municipal services that are provided within a region. So for example, we'll go into, I'm actually just working right now on the city of Escondido. And so you'll go into the city of Escondido and kind of look at, okay, they service fire protection, they service parks and recreation, they service wastewater. What are the demand and capacity relationship? How are they performing? We look at the financial analysis, we look at their finances and perform a fiscal analysis and ensure that they're also doing and performing well. And the purpose of these studies are to inform three outcomes in mind with these studies. One, to serve as an informational resource for the general public. So for you to just be able to pick it up and look through the executive summary and sort of know where your local agencies stand within your region and how they're serving the constituents, including yourselves. Two, to inform LAFCO's associated tasks in updating spheres of influence every 5 years. So we do our MSRs in coordination with that. So every 5 years, we'll do it for a given region. So right now we're doing City of Escondido. We'll come back to City of Escondido in 5 years. And then three, to produce directly or indirectly boundary changes or other governmental changes, such as the consolidation of special districts or the divestiture of powers. So for example, I just have completed a municipal service review for the Ramona Municipal Water District, which is the lone governmental agency within the Ramona region. And as part of the recommendations of that report was that, perhaps you should consider divesting your fire protection powers over to the San Diego County Fire Protection District, which has a greater economies of scale. And Ramona actually just recently did this. They came forward as an applicant and decided that that was a really good recommendation that they wanted to proceed with. And so that's kind of the outcomes that come out of these service reviews. And to go into further detail on my second point, which is to inform, to inform spheres of influence. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Again, we establish, amend, and update spheres of influence every 5 years in conjunction with those MSRs. And these spheres of influence designate the appropriate and probable future service areas for that government agency. So if you look at the screen here, this is specifically for the city of Escondido, since we're here today. And everything that's colored in orange is the jurisdictional boundary for the city of Escondido. Everything that you see that's within the dotted line, which is the sphere of influence boundary, is the probable future service area that the commission has designated for that agency. And so what we're basically saying is everything that's inside that will probably be developed and will probably annex into the city in the future. And typically what we say is the probable service area for the next 5 to 10 years, which is why we come back to that agency every 5 years to check in and say, do we need to update this? Does it need to stay the same? What do we do from here? And so we take into consideration what the needs of that community are. And so if we're going through an MSR and we say, okay, we're really reaching capacity with wastewater, we're really reaching capacity with whatever it may be, that kind of signals to us, okay, well, we need to kind of align those certain needs with the sphere of influence or what that development is going to look like for that agency. This is also a tool that's used by the Regional Council of Governments, so SANDAG, in allocating housing need assignments for the county as well as cities. So it's a really useful tool. So kind of tying it back to this grant, LAFCO's interest in this grant and really being a part of it is to meet that objective or goal of preserving open space and agricultural lands. And so if we're able to look at a map and use the maps that are created by SDSU and the team and be able to say, okay, well, here, there's some really important agricultural lands, probably shouldn't be developed. It's really important for us to know as we designate these boundary lines. So if we don't know that there's really important ag land, then we're really making our decisions based on not knowing some really important information. So that's why we're really excited to be here and to be a part of this grant, is to work alongside these really great agencies and being able to make better decisions for the agricultural community. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Priscilla.
You're welcome.
Question?
Absolutely.
Does LAFCO's oversight include how these jurisdictions are managing CEQA requirements as well?
No.
No.
So if let's say City of Escondido says, we would like to apply to annex, X parcel, and there needed to be a CEQA determination based on that, they're usually the lead agency. And then we'll take a look at that determination, say, okay, we agree with it, or we disagree, and these are the reasons.
Let me ask a follow-up question.
Absolutely.
Is there oversight in the state to make sure that the lead agencies are complying and doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the end of the day, the Attorney General has complete oversight of all that. Yeah. No, I'm almost certain.
Yeah, typically with contentious proposals, I would agree. The Attorney General gets involved if they're not in agreement with that.
My question was.
It's rare, but.
To a specific case, my question is, for example, CEQA was managed completely different in San Diego County than Amador County. Doesn't seem to be any state oversight as to, is there enough resources managing it in Amador, or is San Diego overstepping? Why is there a difference on the state law?
Interesting. I'm not too certain about that, so that's interesting. I should know about that.
I think it's widely known in the producer market.
Okay. See, and these are
That is
things
more
that.
strict here.
This is the strictest on earth.
And
Maybe
it's more strict
Singapore
than
might
San
be.
And San Diego is
Yeah, I
it's
think
so
that's the
different than
challenge.
other counties. I mean, we're just developing, and we're still in that state versus other counties. And actually, we're one of the biggest LAFCOs because there's such development still happening in this county versus other counties where there's a LAFCO. The staff is much smaller because there just isn't that flow of proposals of developments happening versus here.
I'll also say San Diego County is one of the most biodiverse regions in the nation. I think there's over 85 endangered species alone here. So when we talk CEQA and environmental impacts, I think that complicates and plays into all of that. Whether there's merit to how scrutinized that is, I mean, that's a whole nother debate with CEQA. But to your point, I mean, I would agree with you that
For every good example you have of an endangered species, a farmer in the room could give you a bad example.
I could give you the same. So. I wasn't protecting it. I was just saying there's two sides to every story.
Yeah.
It gets complicated.
Any other questions?
Perfect. Thanks, Priscilla.
You're welcome.
Lance, I see you standing up. You're all ready to go. So we'll bring up Lance with the U.S. Forest Service, and he's going to speak to us about grazing contracts.
By the next slide.
I think so. I can flip from here if you. There you go.
So yeah, my name is Lance Criley. I'm the range management specialist for the Cleveland National Forest. And Joel asked me to come here to talk really about the livestock grazing program that we have on the National Forest here in San Diego County, and just access to grazing lands in general, I think. I also serve with Joel on the California Rangeland Management Advisory Committee, which is through the Board of Forestry at the Sacramento level. And that's basically like a kind of a standing stakeholder group that the Board of Forestry stands up to try to, let's say, kind of run interference on policies that might be affecting rangeland users and give that perspective of rangeland users to the state. So this is a picture that's in San Diego County, that's Mount Laguna. And so whenever I talk about the Forest Service, and this applies to BLM as well, kind of our sister agency, I always like to start with kind of a historical perspective, because that's the only way for it to really make sense. And so the green lands on this is Interstate 8, Speedy House Reservation perspective. The green lands are all National Forest System lands, so those are all owned by the federal government. And within those, you see a lot of these little patches of private land, right? And those are all what we now call in-holdings. Most of those are working ranches. They were homesteaded early. And the intent of that Homestead Act was to settle, the federal government never wanted to own these lands back in the 1800s. They wanted to get rid of these lands. And the Homestead Act was an attempt to do that. But the Homestead Act had a real specific Eastern US perspective that we're gonna settle it with farmers. We're gonna come out here and then we're gonna farm, and so therefore the land sizes were 80 acres, 160 acres, which is not enough to ranch. I think that's one of the key things to know about livestock grazing is that ranchers need access to thousands of acres to be a viable operation. And almost every private rancher in this county that's of any size relies on lands that they don't own in order to be successful. They rely on leases, they rely on access to federal lands, other government lands, private leases. And it's basically impossible to have a grazing operation without those additional lands that they don't own. So this is just a map. These gray lines are what we call grazing allotments. And so when the federal government decided, that we're not getting rid of this land after all, a lot of because it wasn't getting homesteaded, there was no water in most of the cases, no ability to improve the land enough to keep a homestead. When they were reserved as the forest reserve, they were already grazed by the owners of those inholdings within the lands. And so the Forest Service, federal government, kept those grazing operations and actually became part of the mission of the agency to have grazing. So both the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, it's part of our mission to have access to livestock grazing. It's part of our mission that is frequently forgotten, I would say, and constantly needs to be reminded about, but it's definitely part of our mission. The Cleveland National Forest Land Management Plan says we will make grazing opportunities available. So the grazing allotments they're often tied historically to the management of these private lands. They're often considered part of the ranch, the federal lands in general. And grazing is generally permitted through 10-year grazing permits that then roll over to that same family if they so choose to keep it. They're not leases. They're not openly competed or bid upon. And the fee that the grazing permittee pays is set at a national level. So a rancher on the Cleveland National Forest pays the same fee per head month that a rancher in Nevada pays on BLM land, or a rancher in Montana pays on Forest Service land up there. No control over that. So this is just a map of the county. And what you see is the blue are our current active with the grazing permittee grazing allotments on the Cleveland National Forest. The red outlines are currently inactive or vacant. Go into why those are. And then something I wanted to point out is, so these allotments are not in any stretch of the imagination an exclusive use. So you have probably hiked through these allotments and not knowing you were in a grazing operation. Mount Laguna is probably, everyone's hiked there, I hope. And so these little, it's hard to see, but these little green squiggles here, that's what we call primary range, and that's where you're actually likely to see a cow at a certain time of year. So just, you can see the subset down of the size of the allotment, and that goes to these acreage questions that you guys were asking earlier. It gets super complicated trying to define, the grazing acreage on a forest. It's very difficult, but we can have, we have allotment. And so, back to my notes here. So like I said, active allotments have been grazed by the same family for generations in a lot of cases. The vacant allotments are vacant for a variety of reasons. Some, and this is, just full disclosure, some of these were made unviable due to Endangered Species Act restrictions. And a lot of that was not that grazing was forbidden in these lands, but that the infrastructure costs associated with like fencing riparian areas became too burdensome. I would say riparian birds were our main acre reducer on the Cleveland National Forest. Lack of water is increasingly an issue. Springs have been drying up. And then regrowth of chaparral. Back in the day, there was much more of a willingness to just chain out chaparral lands or actively burn chaparral lands. That's getting more difficult to do. Our forest plan forbids us from type converting chaparral for forage production, we can type convert chaparral for fire prevention. I can get to that in a little bit about maybe the way forward for land access. And then vacant allotments and any new grazing area requires a NEPA analysis, which is our CEQA, and that gets very expensive. And so I get calls monthly, I would say, maybe from people wanting grazing leases on the national forest. And that I always hate because it's usually a voicemail. I get a grazing lease, and I always hate calling those people back because it's almost always, well, technically, sure, but in reality, our ability to respond to that and actually do the NEPA, it's really low priority for our leadership. Fire is the main priority for our leadership. But we are currently on the Cleveland National Forest. We have finished the NEPA analysis on all of our active allotments. So that's all been NEPA'd, as we'd say. So we actually are moving on. We are doing NEPA on one vacant allotment right now to get a legal permit on that allotment along Boulder Creek Road. And hopefully we get that one down. Hopefully we'll keep building on that success, I hope. And yeah, I think that's really, I think that's really all I have. I mean, to the state level, John was mentioning, John has access. There are other federal landowners. So the Department of Defense actually has a grazing lease in San Diego County on Fallbrook Naval Weapons Station. And then there's federal fish and wildlife lands, which you do have a lease on. John right there has a lease. They are capable of having grazing leases. And then increasingly the states, and I've been involved with this through RMAC, the state, so state fish and wildlife service lands, state forest lands are increasingly interested in bringing cattle back. And the Rangeland Management Advisory Committee is currently has a subcommittee that's developing templates for grazing leases for different agencies to utilize. So that's something that's coming. I think for the Forest Service, there's increasingly an awareness of currently the grazing program and the fire prevention program are two different worlds. And there's increasingly a talk of trying to bring those together and planning grazing and fire prevention together. And I think that might open up new grazing opportunities in the future. Some of our old grazing allotments were fuel breaks back in the day that were then deprioritized as fuel breaks and let to grow back to chaparral. But I think that type of thing might be coming back where we're doing active grazing leases on fuel breaks. And we are also investigating on the Endangered Species Act front. We have some endangered species that we took the cattle off. The Endangered Species Act, it's one of those things where, hey, there's cattle and endangered species. Maybe they're getting along, but that's not the old thought. The old thought was got to get rid of the cows. So now the Endangered Species Act aren't doing so well on certain parcels, and so we're talking about bringing cattle back as basically a service, a wildlife improvement service, which would be a little easier for us to do on a NEPA standpoint. But yeah, I think it's just for this group to think about going forward, it's just really focusing that, ranchers need access to lands that they do not own. And the more impediments there are to that, one of our purposes and needs when we do NEPA on our active allotments is so that those in holdings don't type convert to subdivisions. It's not good for us, it's not good for anybody. So that's one of our purposes for keeping the grazing program going. Yeah.
So if for some of those allotments, if someone decides to get it down with grazing and they don't have any kids, what happens to that allotment? What are the choices?
That's a great question. So it's rare that that happens. But yeah, if an allotment goes vacant due to like the family walking away, a lot of that depends. Well, it's very case by case because often the water is on those private lands. Often the federal side of the allotment is not usable without those private pieces as well. They kind of work together. And so if they sell those private lands, the new buyer would have priority if they wanted to get that grazing allotment. One of my vacant allotments is because the new buyer of a ranch had no interest in grazing. He wanted to make a motocross track, right? And so on his land. And so that allotment's vacant. But if the buyer of that, if someone comes in and buys that again and wants to establish grazing, then they would be the priority. It's pretty rare that one is just free, that there's a grazing allotment that's just free and open. But in that case, the agency itself, we have a lot of discretion because it's not a lease and we don't have a bid process. We have a lot of discretion on who we can give that to. So other permittees or just people that we think will do a good job, we have the discretion to give them those leases. But with the NEPA thing, if it goes vacant for any period of time, then all of a sudden we need NEPA to bring it back, and that becomes a big.
So the NEPA, certification, that's not the right word. So it's not also a timeline, it's for any sort of change. But if you're gonna have, say there's a change in ownership.
Yep.
And the NEPA documentation was often done, can't that NEPA documentation go with that
Yes.
transfer as long as the use was the
It
same?
can, yeah, it can. Yeah, we do NEPA on the allotment. We do what's called an allotment management plan that stays with that piece of ground. It's not tied to the permit or the permittee. It's tied to the ground and the action on the forest land. So it can absolutely travel to the next person. So once NEPA is done, as long as we have to keep it current with changing conditions, but
We're fortunate to have plants here, but regarding BLM with the U.S. Forest Service, but with the BLM, they seem to be really severely short-staffed with just trying to get anything as far as either a NEPA going or just a rangeland guy like you down here to really evaluate a piece that's been historically grazed and sitting fallow. I don't know if that's getting any better. You got any insight to that?
that is probably not getting better. I would say, but yeah, the Bureau, so the BLM, you know, with they own a lot more acres than the Forest Service owns with a lot fewer people managing those acres. And I think San Diego County especially is a real outlier for the BLM. Their parcels are pretty isolated here. And so, yeah, they're very understaffed here. But they would have to go through that same
process.
Yeah, we're almost identical in our regulations, the two agencies. Isn't that crazy? I mean, the nickname for the joke nickname for the BLM was the Bureau of Livestock and Mining. But yeah, no, they are increasingly, because of staff time, I think increasingly restrictive, right? Here, just because they don't have the time to do that NEPA process or to manage it once they have a permit. Yeah, and that's true with the Forest Service as well. I am the only range specialist south of the Grapevine. So on the Cleveland, the San Bernardino, and the Angeles, I'm the only range.
So I mean, we're fortunate to have you down here.
Yeah.
It's nice to have other guys too.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Appreciate your time. No worries. Which leads to me again. And I wanted to just briefly talk about the county's agricultural promotion program. I'll bring up the slide up here in a second. But real quick, all my roads lead to Diane Jacob. And I think it's important because working for her for 17 years, in my personal opinion, she had the greenest thumb for any conservative that I've ever known. She was big on protecting rural communities, and I think it all becomes, she's a fourth generation San Diegan. She owns 90 acres out in Deerhorn Valley. She actually lived on that land for a long, long time. Her and her husband actually operated an Angus cattle operation for a long, long time. So agricultural, dirt in her hands was her passion, which led to a lot of the programs that we see today at the county. And I just kind of wanted to tee up a few of those. Back in 2006, a couple of vintners from Ramona came to our office and said, hey, we're trying to showcase our wine and we want to have retail sales and we want to have a tasting room. And the county's regulations basically prohibited that. It required a major use permit going through CEQA, which costs about $250,000 in 2 to 3 years to process. And it just was cost prohibitive for these small boutique wineries to showcase their wine. So we did a 4-year effort, created a boutique winery ordinance, peeled back all those regulations, made it a tiered approach where you're a boutique winery and under 12,000 gallons of wine produced a year, you were allowed to do a tasting room by right. We went from 1 tasting room in Ramona to 30, which was a huge success. And I think last time I looked, I think we have over like 120 bonded wineries in San Diego County. So that first little piece of just having vintners come to us kind of dominoed into, we updated our equine ordinance, we updated our beekeeping ordinance, and we started to see a theme, which led to, in 2017, us adopting at the county the agricultural promotion program. And it was a set of amendments to the zoning ordinance to streamline regulations and permit requirements for agricultural uses, with the goal of streamlining those regulations, reducing those requirements to further enhance, promote, and protect agricultural uses in the region. And just quick, the revisions that were made, it made it easier for the following ag uses. This isn't the whole list, but kind of the few main ones that I put down. Microbreweries, cheese making, dairy operations, on-site food production, mobile butchering, which I've heard is starting to come back in this region. I've already had a few people reach out to me, highly interested in creating those operations again. Packaging and processing, on-site horticultural sales, animal raising, roadside sales, ag tourism and homestays, and protecting ag lands consistent with the county's general plan. So in my personal view, the ag promotion program is kind of like the mini constitution for ag uses in this region. And I just think it's important to highlight that, because I think a lot of what we're talking about today could kind of see the impetus of through this program, and whatever changes that we go forward with can be all tied into this program. And I think it's the biggest focus is because it's changing regulations. It's making it easier for property owners to do things on their property that either already exist or promoting those ag uses. So just wanted to highlight that. If there's any questions or comments.
I have comments. I think it was great what happened with the wine industry in Ramona, but regulations creeping back. I'm doing a small winery, and I'm looking at between consultants and county fees about $200,000, and that's before I put a single piece of concrete.
And I think that's important for people to know. And I'll just real quick, part of the background, we started it in 2006. It got adopted in 2010. And even so, the winery industry it's changing fluid, it's changing quick. And we even updated that ordinance because at the time, our ordinance was like a couple years old and it was outdated. I mean, I remember vendors coming to us and saying, we've got to change the sourcing of the grapes that we can't produce. We have 2 or 3 bad years. We're unable to make the regulations of having 75% of grapes produced online or on our property to make the wine. So how can we source them from other properties? And we went and updated and amended that ordinance. And it goes to your point where it constantly needs to look at. So it's working with, representatives from Joel Anderson's office, the county, to work with, that industry and making sure that we make those changes to keep up with the times. Because I certainly don't want it to get back to square one where you're throwing $200,000 out there. I mean, that's not the intent of all the changes that we've made in the past.
Is this organization on county land, or is it
Unincorporated county.
unincorporated? Okay.
Is it in Ramona?
It's in Alpine.
Alpine?
Zone agricultural, every little thing.
Yeah.
It kind of takes the nth degree. I can go to Vista. I don't have a sink. I can put a winery in. I'd be up and running in 18 months. I wouldn't have any restrictions on where my grapes came from. I could get.
Well, perhaps you can share your information with.
I'm already checked.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Lance?
Obviously, the butchering aspect was definitely a big challenge for ranchers in the county. Especially if there's any desire to do like a grass-fed label or any sort of marketing process.
Yeah.
It's more like a state issue. But if you know any kid who
wants to be a butcher when they grow up. Encourage them, because I think we're down to like 3 in the whole county for local butcher. Just one just retired. So it's really, really bad. So I also have 2 lambs that need to be harvested. Anyone knows anyone? Can't find anyone.
It's part of the problem too, like we're here for the accessibility of land, and it's finding those, not just finding the individuals that want to do that, but finding the locations that.
Well, we're getting closer to having a USDA slaughterhouse in Lakeside, El Cap. But that's CDFA, that's
Yeah.
overseas. They won't have a state meat program. They grow it to the federal level. And it's awful. I have to haul my animals 5 hours in either direction, either out of state or up north for a legal USDA. It's neat.
Yeah.
So we don't do it, we do mobile, but there's so hard to book.
Yeah.
Because there's only 3 guys.
3 guys in the county, or would they come from out of there?
Well, technically, I think only 2 are in the county. One's in Riverside.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it just highlights the need of all these uses and how important it plays into everything and how vital it is to the industry.
It's dealing with the local demand that was not here, 10 years
It's
ago.
true.
All of a sudden, it's, people want, where the food's coming from.
Yeah, local
Go
sourced
directly
and
to the rancher. CDFA caps us on how many we can do a year without getting a label. And then it's forcing us to truck.
Yeah.
After that, to either be Raleigh or Fresno or Geo, somewhere else. And it's going against what your customers want.
And they have such high minimums, we can't get into them anyways.
Right.
So,
So it's hard. So I think when my boys were in 4-H, we had like 15 butchers down here. We're down to, like you said, 3.
Yeah.
You get a date within 30 days. It's amazing. If you can, but it's bad. The USDA plant in Lakeside is going to be overwhelmed if that opens up.
because it's a
And
mobile
I
unit.
think that's supposed to be just supporting the LCAPFFA.
Yep.
And so even though it'll be a legal USDA plant, they're gonna be being able to have it staffed, being able to have it run properly. It's gonna be overwhelming for the instructors and the teachers.
Yeah.
Without us having some type of separate plant to go to locally.
And the only reason that plant got cleared was because of Anderson's office and Desmond's office.
Right.
Because during the pandemic, it was breaking news. Our meat supply was not secure in this county. And they said, what can we clear? So we need to build a plant. So,
Well, it's a good thing. It's
a
actually
really
for
good thing.
education.
Yeah.
And so it's hopefully designing to, get other guys, other kids involved that might want to pursue that activity later. But right now, our demand is right now, and I can't wait.
well, for any of you that plan classes or seminars for producers, if anyone wants to do a meat production one, I'm at the point, I'm now harvesting my own animals and hauling them off to places with my bare hands. So, but I need more classes myself to learn about I'm field dressing, a lamb, I'm field dressing a side of beef. I'm a farmer, not a butcher. I need classes, but I'm doing it now. You should see how fast I can take apart a turkey. It's awesome, but I need more.
Sounds like we have
resources to
2.5 in the region now.
I am not someone that should be called out to do this by any means. This is necessity, to get these animals off my feet.
I
So.
understand.
Question for you too, Katie and John. It sounds like there's a lot of hurdles from the regulation ongoing to just get a plant started and the investment cost, but once it gets going with all that demand, what are the economics behind keeping the business running? Do you think it'd be self-sustaining or it would still need?
There's so many.
Sounds like there's a need.
Yeah, there is. But there's 2 components to it. There's the slaughterhouse and then there's the cut and wrap. And they're both heavily overregulated. And so, a lot of it is just, I think the governmental agencies don't understand what goes into these operations. For the slaughterhouse, it was regulated that you had to have a grease trap. Well, why? There's no grease yet. It's not rendered down, right? And so it's like these little things that we need to wipe off of the books. But I think that once it's up and running, I think this county would be so overwhelmed that it would be so self-sustaining. because our nearest plant is Tucson, which is, you know, a 5-hour haul, or we have to go to Paso Robles because the local ones down here in Raleigh, it's 100 head minimum. Like I can never get in there. So we are going far on do that.
I have a layperson's question. Have you ever gone to these culinary schools? I mean, when I was in culinary, the first thing we were taught was butchering. And so, you know, of course, I was in the Midwest.
Right.
But that would be a phenomenal way to be able to be educating and then see if we can source the future culinarians in the world that have
That was one
butchery.
of the first places I loved, is like cooking school. You know, my husband would appreciate that too. But I couldn't even find like a breakdown class on it. So I go to more of like hunting and archery, you know, places, and they're like, this texture deer. Right on. Okay. It's basically the same animal. So, but yeah, we need more resources.
We're gonna
for
turn
that.
you into the top chef butcher.
I don't want to do this, but I have to.
Even if you had a USDA cut and wrap place, the kitchen is USDA approved, that would be substantially better if we got, you know, if we had a USDA slaughter plant in home to just a cut and wrap facility that's USDA approved would be a good thing for, you know, the full expense of a USDA slaughterhouse that does the cut.
We had one in Curry Mesa maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was so over-regulated that they had to close it down, and that was by the city of San Diego.
I mean, it sounds like we need to get in touch with the feds somehow, some way to just at least bring some reps down. Exactly, just bring some reps down here to just participate and hear from voices like us to just keep hammering home the need and, you know, feel like maybe we're just getting a little, you know, lost down in our little corner of California. So,
Yeah, I mean, we're here today to talk about land, but this really directly relates to that, because when you don't have the industries to support that, suddenly you don't have a way to manage the fire. You don't have a way to support these private landowners, and when the economy at scale collapses, you have land management issues.
they all go hand in hand when you don't have the use. I mean, that's when the lands get converted because nobody's using it, so.
Well, and the end market for all of, you know, cattle grazing out here is outside of the county. Whether it's slaughtering, whether it's going to the sale, whether, you know, we don't sell anything in the county at this point. So all of our end users are outside.
Anyone else? Okay, we can take a next step to our agenda, which is expanding programs and services. And Joel, maybe you can help me out a little with this one. I think we created a list. Perhaps we probably should have made copies for everybody, but maybe I can just gloss over them real quick. If you want to expand on them, maybe we can go into a little more, but you know, we just highlighted 5 programs with, you know, presenters, and obviously there's a lot more out there, but just overarching kind of things to kind of put on your plate and to think about. But we've kind of, you know, Joel put together these initiative proposal backgrounds about land accessibility. And the first one's optimizing active ag land, as we all know. And that's through extending leases at existing public lands. Is kind of what the Forest Service is doing. And creation of additional agricultural preserves with easements, which is kind of the PACE programs we mentioned earlier. And then also activating fallowed agricultural lands. I'm by no means an expert in farming, so I'm not sure if anybody has any thoughts to that point. And then the third point is rezoning existing urban lands for planned development. And I also know as part of the county working there, those urban ag zones, which are super, I think you mentioned that earlier about, you know, taking these small vacant lots from 0.1 acres to is up to 3 acres and giving those property owners the incentives to turn those into what, you know, community gardens or local sourced, you know, produce or whatever the case may be. So that's some of the larger other overarching issues. Joel, I don't know if you want to expand on some of those, and maybe we can open up the dialogue and, you know, continue to talk what the necessities and needs are here.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to dig into some of these as we move on. One of the first ones that comes up, thinking about extending leases at existing public lands. the resource I had in mind there, one of them was the City of San Diego San Pasqual Agricultural Preserve, where the last area in San Diego County is on a month-to-month lease, for example. But yeah, there's a few people here who haven't had a chance to share today. Quentin, thanks for coming from District 5 of the city. And Carmen is here from the Department of Food and Agriculture. She's been a big supporter for new programs like this, one of which is the Beginning Farmer Training Grant to provide land access. And our executive director, Ann Baldridge, is here, who's really spearheaded a lot of the community gardens that we manage, as well as incubator plots. So just want to open up the conversation a little bit, and then I'm happy to also dig into some potential proposals of different ways we could bring agencies and users together. Please.
So almost anywhere I drive, I see open land. So how do we access that? What is that land? Who owns it and why is it?
Yeah,
That's a very
that
broad
sounds like
question.
kind of a matchmaking question. And so Cody and I, as we do outreach to producers, I'm sure you do too, we try to keep a list of who are those producers who have land that they're not fully utilizing, that they could perhaps lease out. But we know that Stephanie, who couldn't attend today, who managed the PACE program, as people mentioned earlier, has a lot of agricultural easements. Whether or not they're active, we're not sure. And so having a systematic way of putting those together, the best thing I've seen so far is California Farm Link, where people will put up, oh, looking for land, or oh, I have land available, but I don't think it's universally used.
Can I ask a question? When you say open land, you mean open native vegetation or do you mean open farmland?
It's open to native vegetation.
Okay, that's a can of worms. That's largely not plausible. Saying you can count for any reasonable farm.
With my perspective of new American farmers, who, man, the people do that.
Yeah.
When I see sites,
So-
look, I think it would be.
A new fight, saying in unincorporated county, which is probably the majority of the open area, you're seeing, yeah, in order to do any farming on anything, you need a house or you have access to 5 acres, and then you can only do those 5 acres. If you don't have the resources to build a house, you'd have to go through the entire CEQA process to try to farm. You can't cut a single blade of grass without going through that CEQA process unless you meet one of 13 exemptions. One of those exemptions is that house is a couple other, like it's been farmed before. If it's not valid, if it's valid for more than 4 years, it's the same thing. So it's largely a regulation issue to get anything into farming. For me and my farm, I'm treated for this process I'm going through. It's like I was trying to build a condo complex. It's the exact same process that a large developer has to go through in order for me to cut the grass. You can farm it right, but you can't cut a single blade of grass.
And I want to echo some of that because with my previous experiences with Diane and at the county, that grading ordinance is completely outdated. I know you guys are working on it, and I think I have no idea when it's coming back to the board for adoption, but it's something to keep an eye on.
To be clear, they're not working on it. The board agreed to separate the code into a separate section of code, so nothing changes. They're just moving it somewhere else.
Now it's getting its own set of rules.
That's what I thought it was good.
Because they're not new rules. They're taking the existing rules and putting them in a separate section of code.
Hannah can tell you more about it, but
Okay.
it's more that there's an act. I don't want to say exemption, that's not the right word, but it's.
I just know my experience, the grading ordinance was so outdated. It was 20 years old. It had never been touched. And to your point, whether you wanted to build a home, and I'm simplifying this, whether you wanted to build a home or cut a blade of grass to just put a shovel in the ground, the process was the same. And that's just not right when you're trying to put a crop in the ground compared to, a 5-unit subdivision. And that's just completely unfair to farmers, and it's not how it was. I mean,
Well, that goes back to a lot of my earlier questions about CEQA. Because San Diego decided to implement the grading and clearing ordinance 20 years ago, now it's a discretionary permit. Because it's a discretionary permit, we can't get out of it. We're mandated by CEQA to follow all of those same processes. In order to get out of it, we'd have to do the programmatic EIR. It costs so much money to get out of it. But
well, I hear you two saying two different things, but it was my impression that they were being separated out, but the ag component was going to be updated to be more ag friendly. But
I'm on the land use committee.
Okay.
I know that there's. a
Whether it's an
strong desire
exemption or
for
not.
Bureau to have it updated, but county staff is not, they didn't get that message from what the supervisors.
Cool.
I would get more clear.
We should definitely have Hannah here next time, maybe to give an update.
Because I know with, that one and like BMT, they're pulling ag out separately. I don't know what that's gonna look like.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to pull it out separately for specific ag use.
That was my impression.
Who can laugh though, or some other organization work with? I know other states have streamlined their versions of sequence, depending on what you're supposed to, like ag would be a good reason here to say, okay, how can we consider this to make sense of it? So, about ag, that fits in with climate change, I mean, there's so many reasons that can be done. I don't think anywhere in California, they really look to streamline that process, but other states.
Yeah.
Those for like other things, but looks for money for, those state level.
Yeah.
But that might be something.
For agriculture, we don't need to streamline, we just need the discretion if you want to pull out, just make it a ministerial permit, and you don't have to do the sequel stuff at all.
No, but you're right, there needs to be some connection, whether it's through the state or through the county to get those clearances through CEQA or improvements or exemptions or whatever the case may be, to make those improvements to separate those
The
out.
exemption, if we're talking exemption, you might want to go through like, state.
Yeah, they'd have to amend. Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate the conversation about how to navigate these regulations, especially with new lands. But if you look at the maps that we provided, you'll see that agricultural land in the last 30-40 years has basically just moved east. And that's fine. A lot of those lands are great for certain crops, but some things really thrive on the coast. And surprisingly, we actually have fallow lands that were previously cultivated or aren't fully being utilized near the coast. And so it seems like that's another separate opportunity to try to put a uniform proposal together to local jurisdictions, including the county and municipalities, to try to activate those lands again. So something that came up during our partner policy meeting a couple weeks ago with the Farm Bureau's advice was to try to put together a master plan for the county of what agriculture should look like in the next 10 to 20 years, so that all of these various proposals that are kind of coming up, the sustainable agricultural land use, or sorry, the sustainable land use framework, or different climate-oriented plans fit into kind of positive uses for agriculture, and keep that in mind. And that's really something that we took from the listening sessions and the outreach effort, is that there's just not really a value of agriculture in any of these processes because there aren't farmers, ranchers represented in the agencies or the decision-making bodies that are doing that. So I don't know, I feel like that's a much larger piece to tackle, but perhaps might address a lot of these issues in one if we had kind of a collective plan. Adam, you said you have some familiarity with what a process like that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously those master plans, but they've been discussed with energy, they've been discussed with ag, they've been, obviously they're part of developments and all that stuff. I told you earlier, I like the idea to kind of have some sort of agricultural master plan, which is kind of like it'd be the constitution of some sort of like roadmap and blueprint of what we're all doing here. And it would have complete oversight of the uses and all that. And it just gives that certainty and assurances and levels the expectations of the farmers, the industry and all that stuff. It's quite doable. I would suspect it's, a couple-year effort. Not going to say it's easy, but it's, sometimes it takes moving mountains to get things done. And it's something that at least we should discuss and potentially explore and have those conversations with those individuals that can help us achieve that. So I like the idea.
Which lessons do you learn about American Farm Manifest and some of the other agricultural lessons throughout?
we reached out, yeah, it's been a great presentation, but not a lot of local representation.
I think if you ask any industry, that all they're looking for is certainty. Certainty in the process, certainty into the market, you know, whether those fluctuate or not. I mean, that's what everybody's looking for. And that master plan kind of sets the tone and sets that kind of, you know, sets the table for what we all do here. So.
Karen, sorry to put you on the spotlight, but I just appreciate what you've done. The Grangettos are here representing Escondido Groves for Agricultural Preservation. Is that right? And you've had a really creative approach through using water differently to give agriculture another boost locally. I don't know how you're approaching the land issue, but it'd be great to hear your perspective.
You know, I'm not as familiar with the land issue because we're not, you know, doing much expansion or anything that age and all that. The water, I think if you look at though, any kind of land use or whatever you're doing, if you don't have the water, it's like the primary key thing. And so that's why Escondido, they can follow the example that this reclaimed water did, which they were not on that path. Really and truly until it's brought to their attention. And yeah, water is everything as far as any kind of expansion. I heard that in the ranching too, you know, if you can't have the water, it's like a key focus area. And that's what Eddie saw in the beginning. So, and that's what gives us hope that we are able to continue, I hope, being able to do that at this point. So, yeah, I don't know if that's what you were asking, but I think that's as far as the land use, you can't have any land use without the water to farm it, period. The water is like, you might as well not bother, you have to have water. So it's got to be a priority to allow some of the farmers at, I should say, at a price where they can farm.
Well, I think that takes us back to the Ag Preserve in San Pasqual Valley, which is on a conservation level, probably the best example of what we can see for long-term ensuring that agriculture will remain there. But it's also one of two groundwater basins in the county that are on the state listing for, you know, being at risk. And so I think it just drives the point home that we have to address both of those issues to make it keep going. My understanding is that a lot of those leases in the San Pasqual Ag Preserve are very short term. And so it doesn't incentivize that producer to invest in the land, to put the infrastructure in, to have the long-term business plan, the environmental benefits of it. And that may go for grazing leases in some cases too. So yeah, I think part of what this group may be able to do is be able to communicate to some of those larger landowners what the benefit is of all these holistic benefits of ag so that they can create more favorable contracts for some of those producers. Yeah, I don't know. Have you been engaged with the Ag Reserve at all?
Well, I mean, yeah, for the most part, I mean, it's right now our main priority in the council office is to try and essentially get a streamlined long-term leasing process because, as you said, it's hard for people to invest on land that, you know, there could be hypothetically out of the month. But luckily, we're blessed with growers and producers like Frank Conine who are absolutely insane and decide to completely invest in the property, knowing full well there is a risk. And because of folks like that, the valley itself is what it is. It's really built by the farmers who continue and been there for 50 years. So our kind of, yeah, as I said, that's kind of our main priority at this point is just trying to get that long-term lease thing out of that discussion. There are already stakeholders in the sustainable groundwater management plan discussion, which is kind of, that's the one I'm still trying to understand on my end. I got to be honest with you, there's a lot when it comes to water politics with the state that I'm trying to fully articulate as to why that's affecting a long-term leasing process. But you know, as I said, water's vital. I mentioned a fun one, which I was curious about, which is reclaimed water. Is that like a purple line that the city itself has put together, or what's that connected to?
The EGAP project had to do with Escondido's wastewater. They were facing a incredibly expensive, and I always get my millions and billions, I mean, huge amounts of money to redo the outfall due to environmental regulations and everything that was entailed. So that and EGAP approached them and said, let us use the water. No, we grow avocados.
we can't use straight recycled water. So the project expanded from there as to where they are treating the water enough that it can be used for our type of agriculture. That's what primarily the bigger areas of agriculture around Escondido and our area are colonies. So that's how that whole project got started. And a benefit, probably some of the motivation for the city has to do with in the future, when there may not be the ag there, they're hoping to be able to build on that project for use for residential, et cetera. But there are plenty of other communities that can utilize the same thing, and you know, it has had always a negative connotation just for getting it for use of later residential, but it keeps farming going for a while before they ever have, and maybe they'll never need to convert it to residential if they keep farming going.
Is this the toilet and tap?
They don't like calling
They
it
don't
that,
like to, but you
but
said.
it is the same thing.
They do like to call that, and they have another, again, something else I never can remember, they have another polite name that they've given to it.
But that's where the bad connotation.
Pure water.
We're already on
Pure
total
water,
tap, though.
pure
They
water.
say nothing that starts in big and stays in big.
I know.
Very pure water.
But the bad connotation is that, you know, where ag is using such a small portion of the water and the rest of the water is basically flushed and done away with. And that I'm putting it in, again, in layman's terms, but there is some way to be able to reclaim that, reuse that appropriately for our farmers, save the municipalities millions and millions of dollars. And then, you know, when you were saying at the state level, we have to be in concert with that. Because what the state is telling us and what we're doing at the farm level, and when the water hits the dirt, stuff's hitting the fan. And, you know, I think when you're talking about a master plan, quite honestly, any industry who wants to be heard basically says, validate us. We're losing 60,000 acres. What does that equate to dollars and revenue? What does that equate to employees and people leaving San Diego and the state of California? And feeding our population, yes, all of that is integral. The voice needs to be heard. And if I learned anything through this process, through LAPCO, is that every farmer said, hear my voice. I don't want this just to be another listening session. Hear me. So now we need to equate acreage loss, dollars loss, avocados loss. You know, we can't even compete in our own towns. That's what needs to be said. Here we are, here we will be, you know, and it, you know, in conversations with all these entities, they say, tell us we want to help. We just need to understand how we can do it.
Yeah, I want to use caution if you just want to put everything down in numbers. The cheapest thing to do would be to make all your avocados and tomatoes in Mexico and let them figure it out where to buy them here, or condos from one end of the county to the other. Now, if you
But
make
see, there's a
most money in the
difference.
county, make most
There's a
money.
difference between, we're already buying 80% of our avocados from Mexico. I mean,
The
in all
people,
short.
I have to believe that if you went down and actually asked the question to the voters in the city, they wouldn't want condos from one end of the town to the other. They want to keep their farmland. It's not a financial question. There's something more. There's messaging there that.
Well,
Yes, it is
obviously, the
educational process.
economic component is important, obviously, but I think it goes to all the messaging of where we are going as a community or as a world. It's sustainability, it's local source, it's walkability, it's getting it, you know, from your farmer market. I mean, if we're driving out this industry, yet we're pushing in a direction as a community to say, let's get everything here, it's counterproductive.
But they are really,
Yeah.
and you know, I'm listening to your problem with meat. And I'm thinking how far you have to drive.
Exactly.
And the expense of the diesel and everything that goes
It
into
goes-
that, and the carbon. And they're
Everything
saying,
against
oh
climate
my
action.
goodness, here we go again. And that's one thing that I hear you talking financial. Eddie's been saying, carbon credits? Here we are. Here we are. Look, we give you all these trees. Instead, I hear the city council people going, go out and plant a tree, plant a tree. I'm sorry to be very sarcastic about that. Because a couple of years down the road, if we don't get rain, folks, I'm sorry, you gotta cut the irrigation to your trees. Let's take them out there. Fire hazard. Come
Heather,
on.
Yeah.
Come on. We produce food.
And let me be real clear, when I'm saying about the economics, I'm talking about the decision makers need to know what would happen if this industry went away. We either are ag or we're not ag. We're either ag friendly or we're not ag friendly. And you know, the sessions that we just sat through, literally everyone resonated the same thing. So there is importance, and our county supervisors and our leadership at the county and the city and the state level hear us. I just don't think we're in both ears.
I was actually just gonna think back to what you just said, is a way to quantify that and well, I mean, I think we all know that like, it's not just about like dollars and cents, but being able to attach some sort of a price to that, to the larger holistic benefits, that I'll just talk about, some of those components. Might be a first start, rather than focusing on like a master plan for agriculture, about like an economic report, because at the end of the day, people are gonna look at what's the price tag for these things, what's the economic impact. And that will be the first point of decision, not a well-being, not a quality of life, not this sort of further down. It's going to be ultimately the screening your face option is going to be the dollars and cents that are attached to that. But that's something that this county is missing, and I know that there's crop reporting, there's the expenses that has, stuff like crop dollars and whatnot, but I think something that's a little bit more robust, and it really talks about the stuff that people wait and attach that price tag to what the actual implications are. Let's be crunchy about that. What are those implications? What does that actually mean for us? And so we're talking about, 10 to 20 years down the road. What does that price tag right now mean? 10 to 20 years down the road, what are the implications for that? Very explicit about that. And that's something that I think this group, would be really valuable for being able to put something like that together. You get multiple facets in there, and then you figure out how to value this stuff too, because that's the other issue talked about. But I think there's ways to do that even if it's by proxy. And so that would be something that as a sort of extended effort, beyond just this initial salt plant, that would be something valuable, and that would be something that should go, and not just to inform local, both at the city level, county, but also the state level. And I think that's where a lot of these changes that we're talking about, sequence, things like that, most of that's going to have to be driven at the state level to some extent. And so that would be, I think it would be novel. I don't know if something like that exists in other counties.
I'd love to piggyback on this because this makes me excited because, at LAFCO, we're talking about what is needed throughout the county and how can we further extend and go into additional rounds of salt, but provide some really good information that's needed. And it's exciting to hear you all say that we do want that economic analysis that would be helpful, because that's sort of what we've been talking about is perhaps we can go out and do a market analysis to really truly understand what is needed to be a sustainable agricultural producer in the county so that we can provide that information to either existing farmers, but also those new incoming farmers that are hoping to, be a producer within the county, but be sustainable and be successful. And so it really speaks to just hearing you all. It's exciting to hear that it is something that's needed and is wanted. It's something that we're thinking about and wanting to provide some really good and timely market information so that producers can use it, but as you said, also be used at the LAFCO level, at the city level, county level, and really understanding the agricultural community. But what I love about this round is that we're really putting down that foundation of, okay, well, where is the agricultural community out there, right? Because we're seeing that there are some discrepancies in acreages and whatnot. But then being able to go further down the line and say, okay, well, this is what's sustainable, and these are the economics of it all, so that way we can base our decisions on something concrete. Yeah.
We don't know who all is here. Use for some of these metrics, right? What these metrics are actually capturing, what they need to capture, or are fully meaningful. Are there other kinds of meaningful metrics that we help contextualize some of the metrics that are available?
just ask a question too. Briefly, you mentioned carbon credits. So is that an overall, we don't like carbon credits, or an overall we do, or I don't think I caught on too well.
I think that that's an incentive for people to keep farming. Any kind of carbon, because it's there already. You don't have to develop it. It's there. If it balances things off, nobody looks at it. It's like, oh, that's agriculture. Drive by that. It's there. You don't have to plant it.
Right, and I just drilled down.
No, no.
I'm sorry. To further drill down, is it accessible though? Like, because you would have to analyze what the carbon sequestration is happening on that farm, analyze it and produce that number in order to get credit. Is that something that's easily accessible or not?
You know, it's unfortunate that Eddie is not here to answer that because he has done quite a bit of research into that. And I do believe you can quantify it. Somebody else has to.
Darcy's jumping.
The Healthy Soils Program, and I think there's so much on that. That is on us to start with, but there are the tools available.
That's probably what Eddie is working with.
Yeah, through the common planner and tools like that, you can provide a general like, average benefit that you would expect to see. Because during a drought year, you're going to see different carbon storage rate and loss than you would on a normal year, or because practices change and owners change, you can't guarantee. And so that's why I want to emphasize what Bill was saying is you can't just look at the market value of these crops. You really need to value the ecosystem or the holistic benefits of these, perhaps financially. I mean, there's youth education, there's food security, climate resilience, wildfire management. And if that goes into the economic analysis, it would look a lot different than just showing, oh, San Diego is a tiny industry for agriculture compared to military and tech, because it's part of our lifestyle and that's not being accounted for.
And everything that was just said will get the attention of USDA and CDFA. Those are the two entities that basically then bless us with grants, or then the federal government will be able to speak to us also. So, you know, when you talk about master plan, I always said it was like an ag Bible you need to have, and you need to start from Genesis all the way through to the end. So you don't have an apocalypse. And we're at that phase.
Yeah.
We're at the end game, you know, so we have to start somewhere to get people's attention.
John?
I think what's important is just having our master plan and all our data, but really we need to be able to tell our story. Number one, and number two, it needs to be brought to the decision makers, political people, where they feel comfortable, because they don't understand.
Well, I was gonna.
And that's what's important, is that education of what we're doing, because agriculture is extremely technical. It's not like the guy walking around with a straw in his mouth anymore. That's old school. Yeah, it's not happening. Okay, we're in science-based industry.
John, I was gonna add on to that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's now or when this program concludes and the recommendations, the report that comes out of it. I don't know if it's before an economic analysis or after, maybe it's spearheads, but I'm with you. I feel like we need to put together some sort of symposium,
Right.
go down to the board, go down to our elected officials and actually educate them about what this, I mean, they all know, they all read the crop report, okay, 1.9 billion to the economy, you know,
Right.
but do they know?
Well, that's just it. And with that,
we need to go
knowledge,
educate them.
Yeah, with the education, then they start to feel more comfortable about making some educated decisions. And I think that's what's important, is education is huge. And telling the story and education, providing the data that we are all talking about, that we know with each other.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be what Manhattan is on a state.
Yeah.
We all talk with each other, we all are together on one plan, even in my own industry. But so we're all together, but the people that are making the decisions are like, what are you talking about? So it has to elevate from us to the decision makers in education, from education and telling the story.
Maybe we can work with your office to just maybe get Supervisor Anderson's thoughts about some sort of symposium or
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I can tell you, you'd be very interested in that. And Supervisor Anderson is the only county supervisor that actually lives in unincorporated county right now. So he's very familiar with the challenges that come along with the backcountry and agriculture. And a lot of the supervisors, they only represent incorporated areas. They have for a long time. That poses a big challenge for getting the other supervisors on board with a lot of these policies. So whatever our office can do to support that effort and communicate on that, we're there to empower you guys to make that happen for sure.
Cody?
I have something to add on to that. I appreciate the notion of like collecting the economic viability and all of those, the echoes of that throughout the county and throughout our industry. And I'm also wary of like answering a report with another report. So I am hopeful that because there is a climate action plan going on right now, because we are doing this, because there is a regional decarbonization framework, that like not one agency has to reinvent the wheel, because at the same time there seems to be a lot of research going on. So I'm hopeful through this, if only because Joel and I have reached out to a bazillion people in the last 3 months that maybe we wouldn't have immediately worked with through this project, that we at least open a couple doors into some agencies that might have information that could like create a merged plan that could give this information instead of one person taking it on, as well as the fact that we've spoken to 99 farmers and ranchers, at least it's not the whole 5,000, but some kind of mixture between the two. Our access to all of that is open through this. So I'm hopeful that something like that wouldn't have to be ground zero effort. Like we could take some of this that's already been going on, because yeah, I'm quite for that.
Well, it felt like we were jumping ahead to what's the kind of the outcome of this, and you might have seen that Dale's got one from them, the outcome from Santa Clara County. That's part of it, about 80-page report. It's really beautifully done. It's got some great infographics and information for high-level policymakers. But I didn't see a product from them that was just kind of what some of you were describing, a little brochure or a 4-page or some summary where really clear talking points that we can all be on the same page on. And I feel like that would be something really great to come out of this with, so that regardless of what the working groups achieve, that it's all under some general vision of this is what we need to be asking from our policymakers. The part that I'm kind of stumped on that a couple of you proposed was not just working at the county level, but at the state level. And maybe you could clarify how that would work, because to me, that feels very inaccessible.
So, so we're talking specifically about the product, the report coming out of the salt grant, that's why we're kind of skating back to.
Or some way to propose this to policymakers. Yeah.
Okay, so my thinking is like, from the data collected in the salt grant, you guys have the 99 users, and then the policy recommendations that come out of these sessions, and then the working groups with that would be, something along the lines of, I think, especially I think the producers' voices, but because this is more of a qualitative analysis at this point, I'll emphasize, you have an opportunity to actually create some narratives, and even if it's not like one farmer's voice, it's obviously this is survey based, so it's open-ended questions plus the demographic information. But really sort of like or something like that would be kind of almost use them, and I don't want to say that cities, because that's not the way, right? It's sort of a prototypical, right? Kind of, but create narratives around that sort of prototypical, like different kinds of farmers in there that might be representative of different kinds of sizes, crops, et cetera, issues, needs, et cetera, throughout the county, and then sort of use that, because what you have data-wise is you can't do the quantitative analysis, it's too small. So the best you can go for is like, so here's the descriptive statistics of what we have, but we still haven't had enough time. So again, the people within this sort of start, when you start parsing stuff out, the end gets so tiny that it's really hard to say that this is something that's generalizable. So that is a limitation. So that's why I think like talking about sort of what you learn from that, from the data collection, how to maybe do that better in the future, and how to access these, a hard to reach population, which is probably, hard, that's what they are, hard to reach populations. And so maybe kind of talking about that would be an add-in. But to this report, it would be informative for the future. But with the data
that would make sense if you can attach that to the policy recommendations that come out. Because really what should happen is that those sort of like what you've gathered from the producers directly should really be reflected in those policy recommendations, right? You don't want to say, we collected this data over here, this is what people were saying, and then we've got this whole list of sort of other kinds of policy recommendations that are sort of like where there's a gap, there's a detachment. So making sure that those two things support each other, right? And I think that's really critical, particularly for the kind of and for what would be an effective way to increase that, because you're humanizing it. You know, and you're humanizing farmers. And I think that's a really important piece. I think that speaks to the part of education that we were just talking about, is really humanizing farmers and letting people know that it's, this is not just sort of a one size fits all industry. It's not just sort of your stereotypical farmer in the town. I think a lot of folks, even if they're sustainably focused and they're, even if they like agriculture and enjoy it sort of on their own, they're interested in soil food, they may not understand who farmers actually are. And so that would be a real value, I think, coming out of this particular report, is who are these people specifically? And again, that speaks to a qualitative level analysis. It makes sense for the data that you collected, what you guys have. And then those policy recommendations should speak directly to that, should be supported by your outreach component. That I think that would be useful to really drive some of that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more specifically now at the state level. Where do these changes happen, right? Because the focus is going to be on local level, right? That's like, okay. And so that's fine, but some of those local level things may actually be better addressed at the state level, right? Because you can be stuck to a certain extent, kind of like county, but there's certain things that are just not within the purview of the county, where they're just not going to do that. It doesn't make that much sense. And so I think that's where we can start to draw the distinctions to come with sort of broader pictures, right? Because, while San Diego is not necessarily representative, numbers are not representative, of other farmers in other counties in California, probably within other parts, sort of, urban counties, it might be, and there may be some parallels that you can draw. So speaking to that, the draw those parallels, kind of see that thing a little bit larger. That's what bridging the issue of, crossing lines on that one, just data, but I don't know how it's not. Sorry.
Yeah, and just quickly on the data aspect, although it was a small sample size, we're not worried about that. We got the qualitative and policy information we're looking for, and we're just going to be leaning on the cooperative extension needs assessment for 2018, and then the NRCS census for those larger data sets. So I think what you said about the profiles is a really great program.
Cool. Real quick, we're approaching the tail end, so I just want to go to the next issue real quick.
Comment. So Brian Jones, a couple of years ago, when I was first encountering all these issues with CEQA, Brian Jones put together a CEQA exemption for, at my request, working with legislative council, they have access to, and they wrote up a 1-paragraph thing, and I shopped around to the Farm Bureau and stuff. It didn't get any traction. It didn't have any of the science behind it, but building it just a policy statement, you can go so far as have legislative council actually write 2 or 3 amendments based on something like this that would actually solve problems, and then start shopping that around.
I'm sorry to put you all on the spotlight, but it'd be wonderful to hear from county ag and measure stuff, how you feel a good way that we could provide information to you, or use the information you're providing more effectively.
Yeah, so
as we continue with this process.
Prior to this meeting, I spoke with Heather. I'm going to put her in contact with our data team, which is something we're building on. We recently hired another operational research analyst who is working on the crop report essentially year round. And they're the ones preoccupied with how do we use numbers to inform our decision making, to inform supervisors. So I'm going to get back to the department. I don't have the answers. Wish I did. I'll get back to you.
Work with you. Okay, let's shift gears real quick. We got 30 minutes to go. Maybe we can get out of here before noon. The next thing on the agenda is related to feasibility of proposals, and it's probably kind of all what we just kind of talked about. And I think it's pretty general what we've got in the agenda, but if anybody has any additional thoughts or comments to that, sounds what I've heard is seems to be a lot of hurdles related to regulations and those types of issues. And so that's obviously gonna, affect the feasibility of what we do. And it could be something as large as CEQA, which is probably pretty, monumental of an achievement to try to change, to something as, maybe as simpler as, grazing and getting, those types of activities back online and a little more simple with a lease. So just kind of trying to give context here, what could be large and what could be small, but Joel, I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to add, but just kind of a general discussion on the feasibility of stuff, or do you want us to try to kind of prioritize things here, or is it just kind of general?
Yeah, it's general. I think one element that's not visible is there's some people who couldn't be here today, and we're going to keep engaging them in the process. So if you feel like there was somebody who should have been in the conversation, we're going to be doing follow-up meetings with them. We're going to bring them to the strategic plan meeting in September. And the feasibility is like, we've got a year until this grant's over, and in that time, we want to actually focus in on certain issues that key people can collaborate on together. So.
Comment about that. So because of the listening sessions or information, we broke this down into 3 major topics to focus on for the purpose of this grant. But I think that the regulation piece, which wasn't all that widely addressed in the sessions, for example, that each one of those pieces that we decided on water, land access, and they all have the regulatory aspect of that. And I think we should fold that in, because some of the that's only a big part, but in some ways, it may be for more of the legal producers. I think some of the smaller producers just kind of lighter when they can, but that's not effective either. So I'd like to just suggest that we bring that in as a subset of each. Sorry about that.
No, that's great.
I wanted to bring up the triangular structure that Joel is kind of working with for this idea of creating these working groups, and I really think it's a good balance. So when considering what is feasible as far as creating change or starting something, thinking about members of a working group that would include an agricultural stakeholder, which is essential. A supporting organization, so that could be a nonprofit or something like that, working with support stakeholders as well as a decision maker. So trying to find balance in a group that each parts of those abilities are addressed. So just wanted to put that out there, considering these things. Much like John said, bringing the narrative that word is used a few times. I really like that word. Using narrative approach from farmers and ranchers to decision makers who they look at a crop report and they'll see numbers and say, oh, okay, that's up, that's down. They're not actually experiencing it or understand the experience of it. So I just wanted to kind of double down on that moving forward, whatever pieces of action we decide to take, we hope to have a balanced approach with representation.
This group has talked with Sandag, with the EMP, Environmental Mitigation Program, who has been, in terms of ranching, they've been working on some science aspects of some research projects to try to increase the availability of grazing on a lot of these mitigation parcels. So a lot of that open space you're seeing out there are mitigation parcels that are under contract to like various firms that manage them, usually for some sort of species protection, but they're increasingly thinking about livestock grazing. Will manage those lands, but there's a lot of hesitancy. But Sandag EMP is trying to come up with some science to help them be more confident. So they'd be a good person.
So that's a good example, because they're doing that at Ranch Humboldt, where
Yeah, they're cool.
and I'd say the supporting organization there is probably UC Berkeley and their rangeland program. So that's a great collaboration where you have a government agency, a local producer who's really engaged, and then another group who can bring in funds and information to kind of lubricate the process and move it along.
I think they're valuable too in terms of like cost benefit. I think they can provide a lot of information on the environmental benefits. Sort of a certain species protection.
Irrigation. John's the one that put the hand through it. Microscope. They throw a big loop. They got a lot of, they're getting a lot of targets. And there's a lot of, every time we get together, there's more PhDs that are involved. So it's going to be it's a good process, to be honest with you. For San Diego County to go through. Would provide a good database for everybody involved.
Well, I guess some of the proposals I heard today were pretty industry specific in some cases, for wineries, for ranches, and then Darcy, as you mentioned, with the regulations, those are largely overarching, and perhaps we could address that through our report and how we present it to decision makers. But in terms of having a tangible project to move forward for, it'd be really nice to be able to show that we've in some way provided more land access or improved an existing agricultural lease, or perhaps turned fallow land into cultivated land in some case by turning those gears. So I would think we'd probably want to have some kind of demonstration or a model that we could move with, and then also be addressing some of the regulations that are serving as a barrier to that being adopted elsewhere. Yeah, are there, I don't know, as maybe we could go around and people could mention something that they feel would really represent what they're working on. Is that a
Sure, appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'll share something that I'm excited about the RCD. It's thanks to a new grant Carmen put out through CDSA, but they're offering funding to beginning farmers and ranchers for training. And so we're planning on submitting an application to support grazing, targeted grazing in the urban areas, because grazers do not have access to home pastures. And so all the funds that they gain from their contracts, they lose by moving the herd around. And so ensuring that there's land access for small scale producers in the urban areas is something that we feel we could do. Something we're also working on with our community gardens. We have incubator plots that are just a quarter acre, and people are running thriving business off of those, but they're not able to scale up. And so we hope to match those with larger landowners that they could rent from, and then provide new space for new incubator plots. So yeah, a lot of scaling and kind of stabilizing by resources.
Yeah, working with folks in the San Pasqual area as well, because I've heard a few similar programs taking place between smaller farmers and specifically Franco Lands Dairy.
That's great. Yeah, I haven't, but feel free to share.
Oh, well, I mean, we're still meeting with them to understand the program better as to how they're cooperating with other folks, but my primary interest at this point is like, I'm curious about what urban farming looks like and kind of what barriers there are currently for folks to approach that. We've got quite a few regions. I mean, when we talk about ag at the city, it's not just talking about the immediate needs of the property, those are deeply important. We also have to pitch to the rest of the city as to why it's important to maintain the ag reserve. So you've got environmental and you've got economic concerns, which is why I thought we were a great team on both sides of that. I mean, there's an aspect of it that plays into the local economy of the city, but in the end, if you compare it head to head with any other industry and our 130,000 housing, most folks will look at things. So when I saw things like the GHG and the actual impact it has and the influence it should, like I'm disappointed that the city did not include any data specifically towards agriculture in our climate action plan. Because if those numbers are accurate, that's a huge impact that our farmers have had, and they're incredibly important to our carbon reduction. So most of all, like I just say thank you so much for inviting me to be out here. But most of all, we're really curious about the SALT grants as well, because when we talk about land acquisition, that sounds like a great way to A, protect land, but B, get urban farmers into it as well. We've got vast sections of the city of San Diego, which unfortunately are called, they're essentially deserts. They don't have access to the same amount of grocery stores that can be accessible in other parts of the city. And a part of that is design that's left over from the 40s. But it was a farm bureau that came out when the pandemic actually began to take hold and bring those farmers markets sound and help provide for those communities that were essentially more landlocked in that respect. So I'm curious to see, like, hey, well, what are some things that, what do we see urban farmers needing? What's something that could enable and encourage them to expand? SALT sounds like a great way to either, hey, it sounds like 75% up to 100% if there's a meaningful benefit. I think we could see that in many regions throughout the city, and almost we need more of it. So I appreciate you bringing up there is like the agricultural preserve as well. But if you ask any of the farmers down there, they're more likely going to actually describe it as benevolent negligence, because we don't actually have a lot of agricultural laws on the books in the city in terms of regulation and protection or separation of ag land versus any other form of real estate. So really what I'm here is trying to learn, okay, what are some things that are working in the city? What are policies that are ongoing here in Escondido or elsewhere in our beach neighbors? I'd really love to learn more about it, but sorry, I guess I'm coming here to get more information from this group than actually contribute to it. But the attitude is want to see more. And I realize we're not going to be able to affect on the state level quite the way everybody else needs, but we're curious as to what barriers there are here.
If I can make one important note too. I mean, I certainly respect the city's balance of trying to balance their needs with housing and all those necessities and things of that nature. I think it's also important to know, like, these urban ag zones and all that stuff. I mean, they're really focused on very small lots. I'm talking 0.1 to 2, like they're undevelopable in many senses. And so it's identifying those lands that, that they're not equipped to put a house on. So how can we, identify those portions or parcels that could actually serve the community in other ways?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what we're hoping to do is,
Yeah.
okay, is this feasible? Can we see it work in other cities in a way that we can pitch here? Because I know Hannah, she's been reaching out to us for a while about what that would look like in the city.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we're finally getting some data for it that I'm curious to learn more about. So thanks for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that would be very helpful to a producer across all commodities is having one place to go or make a phone call saying, I'm looking for 400 acres, or I'm looking for 1 acre for this commodity. And then you'll have the resource there saying, okay, the state has this available, SDG&E has this plot available. Like, where's that database where I can go saying, I want 400 acres or I want 1 acre, and this is my commodity. This is up for lease in 10 years. This is up for lease next year. So we know when to submit our proposals. Because otherwise, I'm chasing 6 different agencies all the time going, what's for lease? So that would be very helpful for land access, is just having one place to go with my commodities and how many acres I need.
Wow. What a vision.
That was a really big idea. You guys made it happen.
They're trying to,
Ag VRBO.
UCA&R is trying to set up something like that specifically for fuels reductions, kind of targeted grazing opportunities and raising. So that's called match grazing website.
Yeah.
Where people like, I need 15 goats to clear out this 100 acres. Well, I have 15.
That's cool. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's got great match grades, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, there's all these different organizations out there.
Yeah, so
Bring it in.
Yeah.
I think that's a commonality. I feel like in all the conversations that we've been having, at least what I keep hearing, and I heard it multiple times just today, is needing a resource and not having it, or where is it? And it'd be really cool to it just sounds like as people are talking, like, oh, I know, like bringing it all together, which is nice. And this is great because then I'll know. And us too. We have you in the room.
That's how we're fond of members.
Yeah, as we try to make decisions, it's nice to hear from those that are experiencing it, so that we're not making decisions, just making a decision that's going to impact you, but for.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see some more investment in agriculture if we can show the benefits of it. I mean, I think of John property as an example. That was existing state land that once went fallow for a couple decades, and then when he was able to invest in the fencing and the water sources, now it becomes a working landscape. It's biodiverse. So if we could justify some investment, I think we'd see the benefits.
Yeah, I'll share on behalf of Supervisor Anderson. As I've said, we're in this camp. We're here to support you guys, and you've got the ideas. I think something that we can contribute is promoting. We can send letters to our constituents in District 2 who are engaged as producers in farms and agriculture and promote these programs. That's something, so please share those programs when they become available with us. And we will definitely help you promote those through various channels. And then something that we need in return is we need you guys and stakeholders and the producers to show up at board of supervisors meetings and testify when these things come up in board letters. If no one comes in, no one calls, they're just gonna hear from someone who wants to talk about bike lanes. And they're not gonna do anything, they're not gonna take any action. As I said, Supervisor Anderson is the only supervisor that actually lives in an unincorporated county. Jim Desmond also represents a large swath of unincorporated agricultural land. But the rest of the supervisors, in fact, Supervisor Lawson Reamer represents almost zero unincorporated county. It's all along the coast there. So it's very important that all the supervisors hear from all the stakeholders and that we have people call into the meetings, write in, show up in person and testify about why this is so important.
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned earlier, at some point, we need to collectively as a group think of some sort of symposium to get down there, and education and outreach. And I prefer to be more proactive than reactive. And if it is getting down there and creating some sort of collective agenda and mission and education and outreach to get in front of that board and not just, Supervisor Anderson, but all of them, and stress the importance of what we do and why we do it and how we do it. It's all in the messaging. And like you said, John, once that message gets out and they understand that more, they're more prone to invest into those policies and those changes to make those improvements. So.
You mentioned wanting to have like a 1-800 IT helpline, like one place I understand, even working with business, there are so many different programs all the time. It sounds like from a producer perspective, Farm Bureau is like the most trusted source of this in this world. Would you say yes? Yeah. Okay. That's really good to know. I know we use them as a partner often, but from a producer perspective, that would be helpful to know that as you move through projects, like Farm Bureau should be like the center of it or the component of it. Yeah, they get all my questions. Okay, great. That's good to know. Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, Heather.
So I mean, this has been super informative for all for sharing my this time today. And I'm super stoked to be part of this conversation. I think on the personal note, what I'd be interested in participating in is more along the lines of like development of metrics and really talking about like the data analysis, how to collect better data, how do we actually create ways to reach these hard to reach users in order to ultimately be able to collect better data to support and inform what we're making recommendations for and ultimately what we're advocating for on a policy level. And so I would love to be part of that. That is my background in training is actually in research methods and data analysis. In fact, that's my favorite. So this is sort of my jam. I'm very excited about this particular part. So thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for organizing this. The California Department of Food and Agriculture. I don't work. I mean, it's a large department with many divisions.
We've been waiting for you all day.
There's a new office, which is the Farm Equity Office, which is the office I work out of. So we're trying to make an agreement across the agency and starting out with some small programs. And just wanted to add to Joel's comments about the new grant program that we have for being farmers and workforce development. So of course, there's a lot of challenges, but the state is making some resources available to tackle some of those challenges. So it is a new grant program for nonprofit organizations, tribal governments, and community colleges to address some of those issues with access to land. So there's actually some funding available for land acquisition for the state, and it's state funded, so there's not a lot of restrictions that come from USD programs. So please look at the website. It's cdsa.gov and then /BSSDP. farm worker training and workforce development grant program. And there's also some funding for workforce development programs focusing on agriculture. So, you know, we want to be funding the programs that are going to be providing training for farmers. You know, so, yeah, some of the funding is there. We're also working with small producers to provide funding for drought-related challenges that are going on right now. But yeah, if there's any questions or if you, you know, I can always connect with some of the other divisions, the technical assistance programs for producers, such as the sweet programs, some of mentioned about soil people. So I can always give you that information. That's not the division I work out of, but we can be able to. So I'm good to hear about your project, Joel. So I hope that there's more organizations coming out of San Diego that we always get grants from like the Northern California region. There's a lot of nonprofits there working that actually there for a long time. So I'm happy to see San Diego also getting out of some of those programs and take advantage of some of the funding that's usually not there, but it's like there's $10 million that can be split out between periods. So right now we have $5 million available, and next year in 2023, there's going to be another $5 million available for the farmer program. So if you have any questions, you might contact this division.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Dell Hanson. I bought agricultural property in 2006, thinking that I would
Be rich.
be able to just plant. Which I think in 46 other states and half the counties in California is a totally reasonable thing. But the single biggest impediment I've had for the last 16 years is regulation. It's been from water to cutting the existing vegetation that's there, to land they want me to put away half the property in perpetuity and conservation, or pay somebody else to manage it. And the thing that strikes me a lot through every single process is there's no grant, the UC extension doesn't have anything. If I put in and say, I want a grant to pay my attorney to fight the county, I can get that grant. That's the single biggest thing I need. There seems like there should be a lot of research. The reason there's no new farms, the reason you're losing 60,000 acres, because there's no replacement. I'm funded, I'm ready to hire, just let me build a building, and I can't do it. It's that simple.
To your point, Darcy, is why we need to intertwine the regulations through all these topics. And it's I agree, it's probably the biggest hurdle from my perspective with peeling all that back and making it easier for property owners to do what they want to do. It's that simple.
When times have changed, I think ag, importance and being part of that. Some like they stop it.
You know, through the process, and I think it validated again, that farmers have told us that they're no longer farmers, they're educators and they're storytellers. And we just have to uplift them by showing their direct economic impact and their indirect economic impact. Most of these farmers are not just working in their farm and on their farm, they're working outside their farm. A lot of them are working at 2 jobs to be able to support their vision or their future. We just have to paint that with the brush that people see. Yeah, all right. And they're also employees and they're employers.
Well, with that, we're approaching the noon hour, so if there's any other lasting comments, just close it up here. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and their participation. John, Dale, thanks for being here and sharing your personal experiences with what you do, and appreciate all that. And then everybody else, the two representatives from the elected officials, thank you for being here. I saw you both listening intently, taking notes. I hope you guys can take our message and what we're all about back to your bosses and seeing and doing anything that you can do to help us out. And then everybody else, thank you for being here and participating. I think it was a very robust conversation, a lot of information that we can work off of. And I think we'll be circling up again next week and shifting gears to the water component, which we kind of touched on a little today too, which is another beast of its own. So with that, I'd like to adjourn today's meeting and appreciate everybody's time and participation, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.